A voice rang out, challenging every so-called hero who thought him doomed to come and witness the true power of the Demon King. This was the moment the world would finally see what he was capable of. Long before that day, a continent known as the Dark Territory had borne silent witness to an endless war between the demon armies and the combined forces of humans and elves. The stalemate finally broke when warriors from across the world gathered with a single purpose. At the heart of the Dark Castle, they faced the most feared of all, Ishvalt Aslay, the second king of Visgard. The battle reached its peak as both sides poured everything they had into the fight for control. Amid the storm of clashing magic, the Demon King began to chant a spell meant to end the rebellion in a single devastating blow. But the counterattack came first. The sorcerer's strike tore through him, cracking his body apart piece by piece. The pain was unbearable and he screamed, demanding to know what kind of magic a human could possibly wield to break a body like his. On the 12th day of the month of Halflight in the year 528, the story of the 29-year-old Demon King seemed ready to end right there. Ishvalt felt his death closing in, but fate had something far stranger waiting for him. On the other side of the world, in the northern reaches of the kingdom of Lehar, chaos erupted under a heavy, threatening moon. Explosions and panicked shouts filled the air as soldiers scrambled to save themselves and call for aid for their fallen comrades. The threat was Vergund, a tyrant earth dragon, one of the highest-ranked stone dragon species alive. Its overwhelming power had already crushed the human forces and burned through their supplies. In the middle of that despair, a young woman named Iris stepped forward, offering to hold the dragon back long enough for the others to escape. Burning with resolve, Iris swore she wouldn't let a single life be lost in front of her. Her companions worried for her, but they gave her their full support, hoping she could hold out as long as possible against the beast. She knew Vergund's scales were nearly impenetrable, but its underside was exposed and vulnerable. Still, even the dragon's breath alone was enough to knock her off balance, forcing her to fight just to stay on her feet. Bad luck struck before she could unleash the power of her sacred sword, Mistletoe. Knocked to the ground and out of options, she began preparing herself for what she thought would be an honorable end. Then a blinding flash of light tore down from the sky and struck the earth with tremendous force. Still dazed, Iris tried to gather her senses, wondering what mysterious light had just saved her life. As the dust cleared, a strange young man stood calmly before the enraged Vergund. His sudden appearance left Iris utterly bewildered. The young man looked around with an empty expression, realizing this clearly wasn't his castle. Standing barefoot on the broken ground, he began to wonder where exactly he was. The surprises kept coming. He realized his body had changed. He was now human and felt unsettlingly weak and frail. Memory returned. He was Ishvalt, ruler of the Dark Continent, but the size of the moon overhead and the absence of his men told him he'd been moved to an entirely different world. While he studied the dragon's unusual wingless body, Iris screamed at him to run. The warning came too late. The dragon had already unleashed its destructive breath straight at him. Iris cried out, certain she'd failed her promise to protect everyone, her strength not yet enough to stop it. But behind the wall of flame, Ishvalt felt something strange. He'd expected to be gone already, yet here he stood, untouched, inside a pale human body. The dragon then loosed its petrifying gaze, a curse that could turn anyone to stone. Iris screamed, knowing that magic meant certain doom. But somehow, Ishvalt felt nothing at all. With a dismissive smile, he shattered the stone creeping over his skin without effort. Even in this fragile human form, his old power as a demon king was still very much intact. Stretching out a body that still felt foreign to him, Ishvalt decided not to worry too much about a situation he didn't yet understand. With total confidence, he declared that it was finally his turn to act. What no one realized was that the soldiers fighting Vergund belonged to a special task force, 100 of the kingdom's finest adventurers prepared for anything, yet still no match for the dragon. Now every eye turned to the strange young man stepping forward to face it. With astonishing agility, he dodged every attack, leaving the monster swinging at nothing but air. Iris watched from the ruins, stunned at how effortlessly he read and avoided each strike. Without a trace of fear, he readied his own counter, warning the beast it would regret ever crossing him. A single punch landed square on the monster's skull. The force was so immense it shattered the ground around them, dropping the Earth Dragon in one hit. As the dust settled, Iris could barely process what she'd just seen. Her companions, still shaking off their daze, were stunned to learn the monster had been beaten with bare hands alone. Confusion rippled through the group. Who exactly was this stranger with such terrifying strength? Iris worked up the courage to approach and ask whether he'd really taken down Vergund unarmed. Instead of an answer, he simply stared back blankly, clearly not understanding a word she said. Realizing the language barrier, the young man concluded he really had crossed into another world. Losing access to information now could cost him dearly, so, ignoring Iris's barrage of questions, he decided to use an old ability of his to pull knowledge straight from the dragon's corpse. With a single touch, he activated Lyserk, a technique for absorbing the knowledge a creature had gathered over its lifetime. Maps, principles of magic, currency, it all flooded into his memory. It wasn't as much as he'd hoped for, but it was more than enough to start with. Iris, meanwhile, felt a strange surge of magical energy radiating from the scene. A female mage suddenly appeared and immediately understood what had happened, that the young man had just extracted information from the dragon's remains. Thanks to what he'd absorbed, he could finally understand their language, and he offered a brief explanation despite the suspicion in the air. He admitted that until a moment ago he hadn't understood a word Iris said, which was why he'd borrowed knowledge from the dragon. Hearing this, Iris felt a wave of relief and gratitude. Because of him, no one had lost their life. Curiosity quickly took over and the group bombarded him with questions about where he'd come from. Humbly, he claimed it had simply been a basic act of self-defense. The women found that impossible to believe and kept pressing him, certain no one could fell a monster like that with bare fists alone. One of Iris's more hot-tempered companions joined the protest, insisting Vergund was a top-tier earth dragon that no one could beat unarmed. Iris stepped in to calm things down, apologized for her friend's outburst, and finally asked the young man his name. He introduced himself as Vault. He tried to explain that he'd technically already lost his life once and was now starting over in this body, though he admitted he still didn't fully understand what had happened to him. His honesty only confused them further. At the same time, the rest of the unconscious soldiers began stirring, baffled by how much the situation had changed. A sacred beast traveling with the group kept its sharp gaze fixed on Vault, as if sizing him up. To ease the tension, Iris introduced herself properly as Iris von Lisselween and told him he could just call her by her first name. The calm didn't last. Iris's companion launched into an enthusiastic speech about Iris's title, Roswace, a prestigious order of holy knighthood, going on at such length that Vault could only listen with a bored expression. Introductions continued. There was Ludessa, a hunter, and Ranzel, a friendly elf. They also introduced Kururu, a large, furry companion who'd traveled with them for years. The group explained they were known as the Silver Wolf Knights. Vault easily guessed that Iris was their leader, a simple deduction that left Ranzel deeply impressed. Overjoyed, Ranzel threw her arms around Vault and declared they'd surely become great friends, though the sudden contact left him visibly uncomfortable. A shriek cut through the moment when someone noticed Vault's clothes had been torn apart in the earlier fight, leaving him exposed. Amid the panic and embarrassment, a mage named Gelda stepped in, suggesting they head back to the capital to tend to the wounded, saving her questions about Vault for another time. After a long, exhausting trek, they finally reached Arios, the capital. Vault let out a heavy sigh. Teleportation magic was banned near the capital, so they'd had to walk the entire way. Vault was surprised to find himself brought to the Adventurers Guild instead of a military interrogation room. Iris explained she had no intention of treating the man who'd saved their lives like a criminal. Besides, the Imperial Guards were busy on patrol, so it made more sense to handle things internally, among adventurers. Only then did Vault realize Iris's group wasn't an official order of knights at all, just an adventuring party that borrowed the name. They stepped into the guild building and made their way to a room where someone was already waiting. Inside, they were greeted by a fox-eared woman, dignified yet relaxed. She introduced herself as Hortensia Lemme Berdeline, head of the Arios Branch Guild. Vault found himself momentarily distracted, slightly thrown off by how striking she looked as she welcomed the team home. Calmly, Vault insisted there was no reason for anyone to thank him. The guild master pushed back, wanting to properly reward him for saving the special campaign unit, but to him, throwing one punch at a charging monster had been the obvious choice. To most people though, facing a creature like that wouldn't even cross their minds. Laughing softly, she invited him to sit and tell her more about what happened. On the table sat an antique scale, recovered from ancient ruins, not an ordinary scale but a lie detector. The guild master demonstrated by loudly proclaiming how proud she was of her job and how much she loved her adventurers. The scale immediately rattled and shook wildly, exposing the claim as nonsense. Smiling knowingly, she asked if Vault understood how it worked now. Vault finally opened up. With a serious look, he revealed his true identity. Ishvalt Aslay, the former demon king, ruler of the Dark Continent, a man who'd once sought to dominate the world. He described the day his castle fell to a band of heroes, how he'd thrown himself into the fight, and how defeat had ultimately been unavoidable. His memory cut off at the critical moment, and when he woke again, he was already in this world, with no idea what had truly happened to him. He felt as though he'd been reincarnated into this new body. Remarkably, the scale never moved once during his entire account. Every word he spoke was true. Iris and her friends sat in stunned silence at the confession. The guild master, however, reacted differently. She pulled him into a sympathetic hug, assuming the trauma he'd endured had led him to invent a demon king persona just to stay sane. Still teasing, she explained the scale wouldn't react if someone genuinely believed their own lie. To her, the demon king existed only in fairy tales, a villain destined to be defeated by heroes. Vault could only grumble, convinced this fox-eared woman was impossible to take seriously. But the joking stopped the moment he was reminded just how precarious his situation actually was. Vault had initially felt fortunate to get a second chance at life, but harsh reality hit fast. The guild master bluntly laid it out. He had no identity, no home, no money, not even the clothes on his back. And the cruelest blow of all, he was now officially labeled unemployed. The words struck him hard, and he could barely process his new social standing. To live legally in this city, becoming an adventurer was his only real option. But even that wasn't simple. He'd need a guardian with recognized social standing to vouch for him. Frustrated, Vault wondered where he'd even find one in a strange place like this on short notice. In the middle of his confusion, Iris suddenly stepped up and offered to be his guardian. The decision immediately drew sharp objections from Ranzaluna, who felt Iris was being reckless without thinking it through. Iris calmly assured her friend that she appreciated the concern, but her mind was made up and there was no changing it. The guild master looked thoroughly pleased with how smoothly her plan had unfolded. With encouragement, she told Vault he'd surely become a great adventurer under Iris's guidance. Iris, for her part, admitted she'd been genuinely captivated by Vault's strength in battle and secretly wished she could fight with that kind of power herself. Hearing the sincere praise, Vault fell silent, his face turning slightly red. As the conversation went on, Vault's attention kept drifting to Iris von Lisselween. He realized she had to come from a high social standing if she could simply become someone's guardian on the spot. The thought stirred his curiosity. Why would someone of her background choose to work as an adventurer at all? A new day began, though not the way Vault expected. He ended up on a training field with the other new recruits. A gruff instructor barked a welcome, kicking off their first day with stone-throwing drills. Vault felt ridiculous having to attend something like school, though he was confident the whole thing would be easy for him. The instructor kept shouting, ordering them to throw stones until their arms went numb, insisting every future knight needed to turn a thrown rock into a deadly weapon. Bored, Vault finally decided to humor the man. With an arrogant flourish, he muttered for his target to kneel before letting the stone fly. A massive blast tore through the training field, carving out a crater and wrecking everything around it. Everyone present froze in disbelief. Vault himself just murmured under his breath, realizing he might have put a little too much into that throw. The instructor panicked, certain Vault had just cast some high-tier black magic on the level of Meteor Armageddon. The other students whispered in a mix of fear and awe, wondering if that legendary spell had really just been unleashed on a training ground. Vault stayed quiet, aware his power simply existed on a different scale entirely. But the blast had stirred something up. A swarm of red worm monsters burst from underground. The calm training session collapsed into chaos as the creatures attacked. Vault recognized them instantly as guild targets. Instead of fleeing like everyone else, he felt intrigued, curious just how tough these things really were. Brimming with confidence, Vault stepped toward the swarm. He mocked the monsters for their nerve, daring to act up in front of a king. Without hesitation, he launched a punishing counterattack. Using nothing but the stones scattered around him, Vault wiped out the monsters one by one. The sheer force of his throws left onlookers shaken. They started to wonder whether this was really just a new student. His talent and power already seemed to outstrip what any hero could manage. Suddenly, the ground shook again as a massive kingworm tore up from the rubble. The The boss monster's arrival sent the instructor and the other students into a fresh panic. Vault, though, just smiled faintly, pleased to finally have an opponent worth his time. He looked at the giant creature with something close to respect, one king acknowledging another. There was no reason left to hold back. With an intimidating aura, he challenged the kingworm to a duel to the end, a clash between two rulers. After a moment's study, Vault realized the monster's shell was as hard as diamond. Drawing on something he'd once read, he changed tactics. Moving with blinding speed, he charged straight in, intending to take it apart from the inside. Panic erupted across the training field. Screams rang out, mourning the apparent loss of their prodigy, swallowed whole by the monster in an instant. As the instructor urged everyone to run and forget what they'd just witnessed, the danger felt closer than ever. The evacuation orders kept coming, urging everyone to at least save themselves. But just as the monster braced to strike again, a violent tremor erupted from deep within its body. The giant creature went rigid, as though some immense force were tearing it apart from the inside out. Without warning, the Worm King collapsed, breaking apart into pieces. From the wreckage, Vault emerged with a faint, satisfied smile, treating the gruesome sight like something almost beautiful. The crowd could only stare, stunned that a single man had taken down a top-tier monster with his bare hands. Gazing toward the horizon, Vault reflected on this new world. To him, every life and every ending was just another step toward the same future. The bitter failure of his past no longer mattered. This second chance meant he'd reclaim everything he'd lost. Sooner or later, this world would belong to him. His calm walk through the wreckage was interrupted when the instructor approached, pale-faced and awestruck. Trembling, the man praised Vault's incredible strength and pressed to know the name of the student who just pulled off this miracle. The commotion didn't stop there. The instructor announced to the entire group that Vault, who wasn't even officially an adventurer yet, had single-handedly wiped out every monster on the field. Cheers erupted, and Vault found himself swarmed by a crowd already calling him Super Rookie, though all the attention left him deeply uncomfortable. In a quiet office elsewhere, an elderly mage pored over the registration paperwork, brow furrowed. Something about this young man's statistics was deeply strange. His strength was undeniable, but the numbers from his initial evaluation pointed to an anomaly no one had ever seen before. The decision was finalized. Through the official records of the Royal Adventure Training School, Ishvalt Aslay was declared a graduate, but with an oddly low title attached. Apprentice Knight, Level 0. Strange as the rank sounded, everyone still celebrated his instant graduation with enthusiasm. Word of the new adventurer spread fast through Arios. On every street corner, people talked about the Level 0 stranger who'd taken down the Worm King on his very first day. The rumor eventually drifted into a quiet tavern. Inside, a fox-eared woman sat enjoying a drink, chatting about just how famous Vault's name had become. Iris, on guard duty nearby, tried to remind her to slow down on the drinking, but the warning was waved off. The tavern was quiet today, after all. The conversation shifted to Gelda, known for her sharp tongue. Though often teased about it, she took it as a compliment and stayed unbothered. But the mood turned serious when she pulled out something important about Vault's stats. Iris was visibly shocked at what she saw on the page. A level of 0 was unheard of, something never recorded in history. Vault, also present, could only complain about how ridiculous the ranking system was, given he'd only registered that morning. The fact that he'd graduated faster than anyone, even faster than Iris, who herself had graduated at 10, was remarkable. Normally, the lowest adventurer rank started at 1, which made the Level 0 status a real mystery to everyone involved. At first, they suspected an analysis error, but they had to accept the result was valid. No one understood what Level 0 actually meant, but one thing was clear. Vault's combat ability sat at a level so high it made his true rank impossible to guess. The earlier incident had been contained, but the fact that Vault had wiped out hundreds of monsters single-handedly still left everyone uneasy. His power seemed to have no ceiling, and Iris was growing more convinced this young man carried real, dangerous potential. The strangeness didn't stop at his level. When they checked his alignment readings, the data looked just as chaotic. Gelda pointed out that Vault leaned heavily toward chaos, something rarely seen in an ordinary adventurer. The result was startling: Order 0, Chaos 100. Throughout history, even the cruelest tyrants had topped out around 80 on the chaos scale. Vault had hit a perfect score, proof, it seemed, that he embodied chaos itself. Numbers like that didn't necessarily predict whether someone would turn out good or evil, but it was still unsettling. Iris, by contrast, sat firmly on the opposite end of the spectrum, deep in the territory of order, making the contrast between them almost stark. Gelda explained that the extreme gap between them was exactly why she kept such a close watch. The two of them stood like opposite poles. Mid-conversation, she suddenly remembered an important assignment, while still admitting that Iris alone could probably handle most major threats on her own. Still, letting Vault act however he pleased wasn't wise either. They agreed he needed to stay under watch. As a first step, Gelda pulled out an old manuscript, not an original document, but a clue pointing toward their next move. Iris produced a worn book filled with the prophecies of Brigand, once Gelda's longtime rival. Despite centuries of conflict between them, Iris spoke calmly about Brigand's passing a few years earlier, simply from old age. At her friend's suggestion, Iris turned to page 13, where a grim prophecy was written. In the 999th year, the gate of the world would open beneath a perfect red moon, and the great king of terror would descend from the sky. That immediately sparked a serious discussion. The year in question was this very year. Recalling how rare red moons were, their thoughts drifted back to the night Vault had first appeared. Iris connected the pieces and, half-joking, concluded that if Brigand's prophecy held true, Vault was the king of terror from the old tale. They remembered Vault's own claim to once have been a demon king with ambitions of world domination. Absurd as it sounded, they couldn't ignore that the lie-detecting scale hadn't reacted at all when he said it. That led them to a strange conclusion: Vault wasn't lying, at least not in his own mind. He genuinely believed himself to have once been a demon king. With a sigh, Iris admitted Vault was one of the strangest adventurers she'd ever met. The calm mood broke when she suddenly teased the friend beside her, hinting that anything could happen at any time. Caught off guard, her friend protested the teasing. Iris pushed further, pointing out she'd never once seen her show interest in any man before. After some denial, her friend finally admitted, blushing, that watching Vault take down Vergund in a single strike had made her heart race. The confession sparked a small uproar at the table. Ranzel firmly reminded Iris to watch herself and not fall for some stranger of unknown origin. The argument spiraled in every direction while Iris just smiled at her friend's overprotectiveness, secretly pleased that someone had finally caught her companion's eye. Amid teasing about looks and charm, Iris suddenly changed the subject. With a more serious but still playful expression, she asked her companions in the Silver Wolf Knights for a major favor, hoping the talented group would be willing to help with something important. With a pleading look hard to refuse, Iris asked them to let Vault join their party. The request was met instantly with loud objections and panicked protests. They insisted, very emotionally, that their group simply didn't allow male members. Despite the dramatic pushback, Iris decided not to force the issue for now. She chose to wait until Vault's adventurer license was finalized before figuring out her next move for his future. The next morning, sunlight crept through the gaps in an inn window. Vault woke up feeling fairly rested, though he had to admit the room he was staying in left a lot to be desired. He took a moment to gather his thoughts in the quiet morning. While he sat lost in thought, staring out the window, a knock sounded at the door. Someone outside called his name, checking whether he was awake. Still half-conscious, Vault wondered who would be visiting this early. Hearing a girl's voice, he tensed instantly. Bad memories from his past life surfaced: women chasing wealth, status, fame. Wary, he asked who was there, and the voice answered that she'd come from the Adventurers Guild. When he opened the door, a girl named Elsie Noah introduced herself warmly, explaining she'd be handling all of Vault's affairs at the Arios branch starting today. Still half confused, Vault initially mistook her for some kind of palace servant given how polite she was. Patiently, Elsie explained her job was to give Vault full support as a promising new recruit. Though he wasn't eager to get more involved, she reminded him he was already officially registered, backed by a recommendation letter from the training school's headmaster and Iris's guardianship. Elsie tried guessing Vault's ambitions, maybe a war strategist, maybe a true knight. Vault only muttered that he'd rather give orders than take them. Elsie wrapped up the conversation with a wide smile, cheering him on to become a great adventurer. The mood turned awkward when Elsie realized Vault still hadn't gotten dressed. Red-faced, she told him to put on clothes immediately, while Vault, equally embarrassed, apologized for the oversight. Unexpectedly, Elsie ended up carefully helping him into his shirt. While straightening his clothes, she teased him lightly, asking if he was secretly the type who liked being fussed over. With a playful poke to his nose, Elsie reminded him he'd need to learn to dress himself going forward. Mortified, Vault buried himself under his blanket, firmly denying he liked the attention, while Elsie just laughed at how endearing he looked. A little later, Vault stood in the center of Arios, looking over his new adventurer license. Even with the lowly rank of Apprentice Knight level 0, he figured this was his only legal way to earn money in this world. Walking through the crowd, he muttered to himself about his identity as a former demon king before someone called out and stopped him in his tracks. A flower girl approached, offering him a pretty bundle of blossoms. Vault accepted politely, sincerely complimenting their beauty, a small gesture that left the girl glowing with gratitude. The calm moment in the city center was cut short by an embarrassing realization. Vault had no money on him at all. At the same time, an elf girl named Rika offered him a flower for 10 lians, but he could only stand there sheepishly, admitting he was new to this city, or rather, new to this world entirely. Their conversation was cut off by a rough shout from behind, ordering them to clear the street. The collision sent Rika stumbling to the ground, her flowers crushed underfoot. Instead of apologizing, the two lizard men who'd shoved past her stopped to mock her. With contempt, they laughed at her fate, a fire fairy reduced to selling flowers on the street. The taunting only sharpened. They called her a disgrace to their guild and warned her never to show her face at their headquarters again if she valued her life. To them, associating with Rika would only tarnish their reputation. Without a shred of remorse, the two lizard men walked off, leaving her slumped and dejected. But they didn't get far. A cold voice stopped them, calling out lizard brains. Vault stood calmly in the street, eyeing them with open contempt. The lizard men spun around, offended that a human would dare insult their kind so openly. One of them flared with anger, insisting their kind was far smarter than people gave them credit for. Vault answered with a provoking laugh. The threat that followed didn't faze him in the slightest. He seemed to already know exactly how this would end. In a quick motion, Vault drew a glowing magic circle. With a thin smirk, he cast a spell aimed squarely at the lizard. The older of the two froze, sensing something was very wrong with his body. The effect was nothing like anyone expected. The once fearsome lizardman underwent a sudden, drastic transformation in both body and voice. Vault scratched his head, offering a casual apology, explaining his aim had slipped a little, mixing his intended chicken status effect with a gender swap spell. Chaos followed as the transformed lizardman started acting love-struck and declaring affection for his own brother. The terrified sibling screamed, accusing Vault of ruining his brother's life. Without a flicker of guilt, Vault simply noted the effect would probably wear off in about a month. The two lizard brothers fled in a panic, desperate for medical help. As the crowd murmured about how dangerous this stranger seemed, Vault walked over to Rika and handed her an intact flower, telling her not to dwell on what had just happened. He asked if she was an adventurer too, and she gave a hesitant nod. Before walking off, Vault offered her a quick word of encouragement to keep at it. Rika just stood there, watching his back, struck by how extraordinary his power was, until she suddenly remembered she was late for an appointment. Rika sprinted toward Hortensia Burdeline's branch office. A receptionist who'd clearly been waiting greeted her the moment she arrived. Out of breath, Rika handed over her summons, anxious about why she'd been called in so suddenly. The receptionist, mildly surprised that Rika hadn't caused any trouble lately, escorted her into the main office. The heavy door swung open, leading her into the mysterious Miss Burdeline's chamber. Inside, a beautiful fox-eared woman greeted Rika warmly, though there was clear pressure behind the welcome. Without preamble, she announced she needed a favor, and worse, that Rika wasn't allowed to refuse. Tension thickened as Burdeline asked Rika to hand over her adventurer license. She began explaining about a new adventurer who'd registered just the day before, someone rumor claimed had unbelievable power. That someone was Vault. Burdeline described him as a man wrapped in mystery, someone who, if he wanted, had more than enough strength to wreck an entire nation, maybe even the world. Hearing this, Rika trembled, picturing just how terrifying the man who'd helped her earlier might really be. The assignment Burdeline laid out was painfully specific. She wanted Rika to keep watch on Vault's every move. Rika, feeling like her life was on the line, refused outright, calling it a suicide mission. Seeing her reaction, Burdeline laughed it off, assuring her the wreck the world part was just a figure of speech. Still unconvinced, Rika insisted the task was impossible for someone like her. Bertaline shifted tactics and asked about Rika's finances. Embarrassed, Rika admitted her entire savings amounted to just 13 raioni, a painfully small sum for an adventurer. Bertaline used that poverty to corner her, bringing up yesterday's humiliating moment when Rika couldn't even afford food in the business district. She even questioned Rika's pride as a descendant of elven nobility now living in such hardship. As a last resort, Bertaline suggested Rika quit adventuring altogether and switch to the entertainment district, putting her half-elf looks to use. But the suggestion only stoked Rika's resolve. Firm and unwavering, she refused. Becoming an adventurer was the one dream she'd chase for the rest of her life. Rika drifted into memories of her childhood, of the storybook about a black mage her mother once gave her, the one she'd admired so much. That quiet support had become the foundation of her dream. But life had never been simple. Her elven father had wandered off years ago and never returned, while her mother now lay sick back home, still undergoing treatment. That was the real reason Rika pushed so hard to earn money and send it home every month. Watching her resolve, the guild master could only sigh, finding Rika's stubbornness oddly charming. She then offered a special request, one that seemed to suit Rika's exact situation. With a knowing smile, she pulled out a high-value coin that made Rika's eyes go wide. In Rika's mind, that coin alone could clear her debts and cover her mother's treatment. The guild master assured her this secret mission could only go to certain people, and Rika, she said, fit the bill perfectly, since to outsiders she'd look like a naive village girl, easy to deceive and clueless about the world's harsher side. The explanation continued with a slightly odd justification. She needed someone with no companions, someone who wouldn't raise Vault's suspicion, and, most importantly, someone with a striking appearance. Rika protested that her looks had nothing to do with the job, but the guild master held firm that she was exactly the right person for it. Feeling a twinge of guilt toward Vault, Rika finally steeled herself and accepted the offer for the sake of her survival as an adventurer. Pleased with her decision, the guild master tossed over the coin as a token of the deal. But the coin didn't fall easily. With a touch of gravity-bending magic, the guild master toyed with Rika as she scrambled to catch it. Rika could only whine in frustration at her boss's relentless teasing. Watching Rika's near tears only seemed to satisfy the guild master more. She gave her final instructions: make contact with Vault soon and if possible form a team with him. Rika was told to report back with results in 3 days. 3 days passed at a quiet inn. Elsie, the guild receptionist, knocked impatiently on Vault's door, calling his name and demanding a response from the silent room. The door finally opened, revealing a groggy, confused Vault, surprised by Elsie's early visit. Relieved to see he was fine, Elsie couldn't quite understand why she'd bothered to come check on him in the first place, and neither could he. Elsie reminded him it had been 3 days since his license was issued, yet he hadn't once shown his face at the guild. Vault fell into a tired silence, sensing his explanation was about to take a while. Vault began describing his old life where he'd been forced to work non-stop every single day until exhaustion. But since arriving in this world, he finally felt free, no one telling him how to live anymore. He'd come to appreciate how much the guild covered for him, from meals to lodging. Even the bugs in his room seemed too intimidated to bother him. To him, a quiet life free of work pressure was a luxury he wasn't ready to give up. Hearing this lazy philosophy, Elsie panicked, warning Vault he'd turn into a useless layabout if he kept this up. She made it clear the guild's support had limits. If he didn't start performing soon, his license could be revoked at any time. Without giving him a chance to argue, Elsie dragged Vault straight to the guild, determined to mold him into a model adventurer, ignoring his protests that he wasn't mentally ready to start working at all. Once at the capital branch, Vault scanned the quest board half-heartedly. Nothing seemed worth his time, just trivial requests like finding lost cats or picking flowers. Elsie explained that other adventurers had already left at dawn to grab the highest-paying quests. His eyes lit up briefly at a dragon-hunting quest with a hefty treasure reward, but Elsie quickly shut down the idea. As a newcomer, she reminded him, he needed to start with low-tier quests to learn the basics of the job. Elsie handed him a mushroom-gathering quest, which Vault found incredibly dull. Still, with a serious look, she warned that adventurers who thought themselves too special for grunt work were usually the first to lose their lives in the field. Unsatisfied but resigned, Vault accepted the quest. As he turned to leave immediately, Elsie stopped him again. He wasn't carrying any gear. Though Vault felt confident after beating the kingworm bare-handed, Elsie insisted proper equipment was non-negotiable. Mid-argument, a sudden commotion came from the stairs. A girl tumbled down right in front of them. Vault was startled to recognize her as Rika, the girl he'd met before. Embarrassed, Rika quickly got up and thanked him for remembering her. Elsie, watching the exchange, smiled knowingly, thinking the two of them were moving fast. Rika then properly introduced herself as Henrika Estelindel, a level 1 black mage, and Vault complimented how well the nickname Rika suited her. Introducing himself as Ishvalt Aslay, he casually told her she could just call him Vault. For Rika, though, this whole encounter felt impossibly sudden, leaving her frozen pale-faced. Her nerves spiked further when she realized he was exactly the person she'd been thinking about. In the awkward silence, Elsie suddenly asked if Rika would be willing to join Vault on a quest meant for beginners. Given her elven blood, her knowledge of medicinal plants and mushrooms would surely help. Though Rika felt her skills paled next to a full-blooded elf's, Elsie's decision already seemed set in stone. Rika tried to protest that she wasn't actually free, but Elsie kept insisting this was a great opportunity. Watching her enthusiasm, Vault agreed and decided to bring Rika into his growing group of followers, even as Rika felt the whole conversation had moved forward without any regard for her opinion. Then came a sharp warning from Elsie. Vault was absolutely not to use magic on this quest. The words made Rika's shoulders slump, reminded once again that she was a black mage forbidden from using her own magic. Vault could only look on, baffled by the strange situation. A creeping sense of worthlessness crept over Rika. What was the point of being a mage if she wasn't even allowed to cast? Seeing this, Elsie tried to cheer her up, insisting Rika had plenty of other qualities to be proud of. Elsie piled on compliments, her pretty face, her ideal figure, even suggesting she try a career as a dancer. But the suggestion only made things worse since Rika was painfully shy and terrified of public attention. Watching the two of them, Vault sighed, struck by how different their personalities were. The quiet was broken when a rowdy group of adventurers burst in, celebrating a goblin kill. Their attention landed on Rika and they started mocking her with a cruel nickname, Elf Jinx. Their taunts grew worse, even mocking the guild for still letting Rika work as an adventurer. She fought back tears, but Vault, who'd stayed silent until now, was clearly losing patience. To him, Rika was now part of his group. A sudden surge of pressure shattered the glass around them, startling everyone in the room. With a sharp look, Vault made it clear, insulting his subordinate was the same as insulting him as their leader. To cover what had really happened, Vault claimed it was just some delinquent throwing rocks. Though the rowdy adventurers felt an unsettling chill from his presence, they still had no idea who they were really dealing with. Vault, meanwhile, was already thinking of better ways to teach them a lesson. Elsie quickly stepped in to make sure no one was hurt, warning everyone to watch out for broken glass on their way out. Vault pulled Rika along to leave. Amid the commotion, Rika slowly realized the blast had actually come from Vault's own power. Sure enough, just as they tried to slip away, Elsie caught up and warned Vault with a hint of menace that she knew exactly who'd caused it. Vault tried to play it cool, framing his outburst as a favor, but Elsie made it clear that if it happened again, she wouldn't hesitate to bill him for the damages. They hurried off before the matter could drag on any further. Along the way, Rika's stomach growled loudly, breaking the silence. Realizing neither of them had eaten breakfast, Vault decided to find food first. After all, no one could fight well on an empty stomach. Over the meal, Vault explained that payment for the quest would go straight to the capital branch. Rika could only marvel at how confidently he talked about the support they'd get from Elsie. Their journey continued toward Ulnaf Forest, a popular destination for both novice adventurers and tourists. According to their information, they needed to reach a specific area to gather sage spirit mushrooms growing there. The forest felt peaceful and quiet, but Rika couldn't shake her nerves. Vault tried to calm her down, reminding her she was officially under his protection now. Surprisingly, Vault asked whether the plants in this forest ate people or animals. The question left Rika stunned. Apparently, in his world, a dangerous forest meant one where the plants could swallow living creatures whole. Realizing his question had unsettled her, Vault quickly apologized. But to Rika, the aura radiating off this man felt deeply unnatural. Even the monsters in the forest seemed to flee at the mere sense of his presence. Before long, the beautiful expanse of Lake Ulna came into view. The sight momentarily left Vault in quiet admiration. Their destination was an island at the lake's center, home to the god tree. Rika offered to row them across by boat, but Vault confidently declared they didn't need one at all and told her to follow him. Without warning, he scooped Rika up in his arms, princess style, making her jump in surprise. Mortified by the intimate position, she could only listen as he told her to stay calm so she wouldn't bite her tongue once they got moving. In an instant, Vault leapt high into the air, bounding across the treetops at incredible speed. Rika squeezed her eyes shut, overwhelmed by the sudden sensation of flight, until they finally landed with a thundering impact that shook the ground. Once they arrived, Rika was still dizzy and reeling from the rough mode of transport. Vault, completely unbothered, immediately set off to find the sage spirit mushrooms, ignoring Rika as she struggled to collect herself. The calm didn't last. A swarm of armored insects suddenly appeared, surrounding them. Rika panicked instantly, convinced the small island was a trap and terrified that Vault might end up consumed by the monsters. Feeling she had to do something as a black mage, Rika began chanting an ancient fire spell to the god Ignika. Vault tried to stop her, asking her to hear him out first, but her resolve to save the situation was already set. A massive fireball surged forward, exploding with devastating force, consuming everything in its path. The magic's power was so intense it sent out a wave of heat that scorched the entire area in an instant. As the smoke thinned, Rika realized she'd made the same mistake all over again. Filled with dread, she screamed Vault's name, terrified her travel companion had been caught in her own explosion. The truth was, Henrika Estelindel had been born with an unusually massive reserve of mana. Since childhood, she'd idolized black mages from her storybooks and worked hard to become one after finishing training school. But that dream turned into a nightmare during her very first mission. Whether from panic or simply losing control, her attack spell had backfired and struck all 9 of her own teammates. Though her teammates survived, the incident left them with lasting physical and emotional scars. Rika became someone people feared and avoided, seen as a threat by the very people she was supposed to protect. That painful memory came rushing back as she surveyed the damage she just caused. Sobbing on the ground, she mourned her own fate, convinced she wasn't fit to call herself a mage, certain she'd hurt yet another ally, this time Vault. In the middle of her tears, a soot-covered figure in tattered clothes appeared before her. Half convinced she was seeing Vault's ghost come to seek vengeance, Rika nearly fainted in terror, though in truth he was very much alive, just in rough shape. Vault tried to calm Rika down as she begged for forgiveness hysterically. He insisted her spell hadn't really been a deliberate attack and started telling her about his own dark past to comfort her. He told her that once by accident, he'd blown off his own father's arm, a confession that left Rika stunned. To him, Rika's spell hadn't hurt at all, and he praised her mana capacity as far beyond average. Vault encouraged her, saying she still had plenty of room to grow and might one day become a court mage. But when Rika handed him a handkerchief to wipe away the soot, the fabric instantly turned black, proof of just how scorching his body temperature had become after the blast. A new problem surfaced when they spotted the sacred Einzel tree, now toppled and charred. Rika panicked all over again, imagining the brutal punishment that awaited her family for desecrating the forest's sacred symbol. Her fear only deepened as she listed off the harsh punishments that might await her, from beheading to burning at the stake. Growing tired of the spiral, Vault told her to stop dwelling on worst-case scenarios and start thinking about an actual solution. He suggested she simply run or take her mother and leave if things really got that bad. Even as Rika called herself foolish for considering turning herself in to protect her mother, Vault only watched her with an unreadable, flat expression. With a faint smile, he admitted he didn't actually dislike people who acted foolishly for the sake of their principles. He stood before the massive charred trunk with an unusually calm presence. With one casual motion, Vault shoved the enormous trunk aside as if it weighed nothing. Rika could only gape, unable to comprehend how a man who'd just taken a high-tier magical blast could possess such absurd physical strength. Before them, the dignified figure of Einzel Sama, the spirit dwelling within the sacred tree, appeared. What happened next seemed impossible. Vault calmly reached out and took hold of the spirit's form with ease. The shock was overwhelming. How could an ordinary human not only see a spirit but physically grasp one? To Vault, though, letting the spirit simply wander off seemed like a bad idea. Vault suggested Einzel return to the sacred tree, but the suggestion was met with despair. The spirit admitted it couldn't return since the tree had been consumed by hellfire. To Einzel, this disaster was a sign that the world's final war had begun. Seeing how grim things had become, Vault wasted no time and asked directly what needed to be done to revive the spirit. The condition Einzel laid out sounded impossible. It needed an amount of mana equal to 100 elves or 30,000 humans. Vault took the news calmly, asserting he wasn't an ordinary human. With total confidence, he told the spirit to simply accept his mana without further questions. Vault began channeling his power. A tremendous surge of energy poured from his hands, wrapping the spirit in a blinding glow. Einzel flinched, stunned by the sheer quality of the mana flooding into it. That shock soon shifted into a sensation unlike anything it had ever felt. Vault's mana was thick, raw, and seemingly limitless. The spirit found itself completely overwhelmed by the flow, caught in a current of power utterly foreign yet astonishing to its existence. A miracle followed. The barren ground around them burst into lush greenery within moments. The scene felt like a dream made real, a massive restoration triggered by an almost unbelievable surge of mana. Several days passed since the mushroom hunting incident. Vault now lay sprawled on his bed, groaning from boredom. Even though he'd burned through an enormous amount of mana that day, a week of mandated rest felt like torture. He'd already exhausted his patience reading the encyclopedia. Finally, he made up his mind. Vault decided to sneak into the city that very day. To avoid being caught by the innkeeper or staff, he had to move quietly. His skill at getting ready quickly served him well this time, a sharp contrast to his old life where simply preparing to leave the house could take hours. Once he reached higher ground, Vault admired the sprawling view of the city below. His old ambitions began stirring again. Someday, he vowed, he'd claim that magnificent castle and repaint its white walls black. But the grand daydream was cut short by his own growling stomach. He hadn't even had breakfast yet. Eating lunch on the roadside, Vault mulled over his finances, now down to just 2,000 rayoni. Elsie kept pushing him to buy body armor, but with so little money, getting anything decent was out of the question. Borrowing from the guild felt like a hassle too, especially since he needed something sturdy enough to withstand Rika's black magic. Vault realized Rika's habit of triggering accidental explosions needed fixing through repeated practice. While turning over ideas for efficient training, he noticed he'd wandered into an unfamiliar street. Suddenly, a sharp warning shout told him to get out of the way. From above, a girl appeared to be falling or jumping from a building's balcony. With quick reflexes, Vault caught her just before she hit the ground. They both froze for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The girl immediately thanked him by name, leaving Vault confused. How did she know who he was? She asked, just as puzzled as if he should have already recognized her. It turned out the beautiful girl in the white gown was Iris. Vault admitted he'd only ever recognized her in her adventurer gear. Iris explained that despite his doubt, she really was the same Iris, and that rumors of him passing the prep school in a single day had already spread far and wide. The mood shifted as Iris let out a long sigh, clearly weighed down by something heavy on her mind. Since Vault was technically her ward, she wanted to ask him for a favor, and he agreed to listen as long as the request made sense. To his surprise, Iris begged him to kidnap her. Before he could even respond to the bizarre request, a squad of fully armed soldiers burst in, shouting at Vault to step away from Iris. They treated him like an unwelcome intruder who had no business being near her. Iris explained these were dangerous people chasing her down. The soldier's harsh tone grated on Vault. Without hesitation, he decided to grant Iris's request. With a smirk, he announced he'd carry out the kidnapping right then and there. Vault scooped Iris up and bolted at lightning speed, leaving the soldiers shouting orders to surround them. Though Iris warned him about the encirclement ahead, Vault stayed calm and told her to hold on tight to him. It was nothing to worry about. His incredible speed left the soldiers stunned, as if what they'd witnessed wasn't humanly possible. Vault figured blending into the crowd was their best bet to escape, but Iris's frilly gown drew far too much attention. He decided they needed to find new clothes nearby. A new problem arose. Iris hadn't brought her wallet. Vault offered to cover the cost, though he wasn't sure his remaining 2,000 rayoni would stretch to women's clothing in this era. Just as they hurried along, a voice suddenly called out Iris's name, startling them both. An unexpected reunion followed as a stranger greeted Iris warmly. Vault Vault could only watch, baffled, as the woman introduced herself as Cheyenne Loop, an old friend of Iris's. The awkwardness deepened when Cheyenne started teasing them about their relationship. Things grew urgent when Cheyenne warned they needed to move fast to avoid being caught by their pursuers. She proposed a plan that left Vault even more bewildered, swapping clothes with Iris to throw off anyone watching the capital. With a light laugh, Cheyenne revealed she was the heir to a well-known inn, Demon Lord's Castle. The conversation flowed easily after that, touching on Vault's growing reputation as a promising newcomer, and even a joke about the secret behind Iris's flawless skin, leaving Vault to simply listen as the two women chatted. Soon after, Iris reappeared wearing Cheyenne's clothes, but the fit was clearly off, too tight, too snug, and her new look left Vault nearly choking in surprise. Apologetic about the poor fit, Cheyenne could only resign herself to the situation. After Cheyenne said her goodbyes, the mood turned more serious as Iris asked whether Vault wanted to know the reason behind her situation. With understanding, Vault reassured her she didn't need to explain anything until she felt ready. A gentle pat on the head was his quiet way of showing support. Iris's tender mood quickly shifted to enthusiasm as she remembered the real reason they'd come to the city. Hearing that Vault wanted to find an armor shop, she happily offered to take him to the one she usually used. With light steps, they headed off together. They eventually arrived at an armor shop called Dragon God's Scale, where an elderly man named Daman greeted them. The shopkeeper looked visibly startled to see Iris show up with a man in tow. Daman recognized Vault right away as the newcomer everyone had been talking about lately. The mood turned a little awkward when Vault admitted his entire budget was just 2,000 rayoni. Daman sighed, explaining that with that little money, his options were extremely limited. Vault then asked about armor with high magic resistance. Curious why he was so fixated on magical defense rather than physical protection, which most adventurers prioritized, Iris pressed him for an explanation, and he began to share his reasoning. Vault recounted his run-in with the fire mage Henrika, which had taught him something important. He cared more about keeping his clothes from getting wrecked in battle than protecting his own body. Iris laughed at the absurd reasoning and asked him to turn around for a moment. Surprisingly, Iris wrapped her arms around Vault from behind to check something. She could feel a thin layer of mana coating his skin, possibly the secret behind his remarkable defense all along. The sudden contact left Vault thoroughly embarrassed, while Daman could only grumble at the public display of affection in his shop. Iris theorized this was a natural talent Vault had been born with. She suggested he try extending that mana layer to cover his clothing as well. Hesitant at first, Vault eventually agreed to give her idea a try. Vault focused his concentration, trying to sense the magical circuitry running through his body. To test his theory, he asked Daman's permission to borrow one of the weapons in the shop. Iris readied a sword, prepared to strike Vault to prove whether the new technique actually worked. With one powerful swing, Iris brought the blade down on him. Remarkably, the sword shattered to pieces the instant it touched his skin, while his clothes remained completely unharmed. Vault looked thoroughly satisfied. Daman could only stare in disbelief at his shattered merchandise. The celebration didn't last. Daman immediately demanded compensation for the ruined sword. Feeling responsible for destroying someone else's goods, Vault resigned himself as Daman began tallying up the damage. In the end, Daman kicked them out, fed up with what he saw as excessive public affection. Still, Vault figured Daman was a decent man underneath it all. Before moving on, Iris suggested they also stop by a weapon shop. Iris pulled Vault along eagerly, reminding him they didn't have much time left. Unbeknownst to them, a pair of eyes had been quietly tracking their every move from a distance. That watchful figure turned out to be Henrika. She looked both startled and jealous, seeing Vault so at ease beside Ishvalt. A wave of insecurity crept over her, feeling unworthy of competing with someone as remarkable as Iris. Henrika pushed back against the jealousy, reminding herself that her job right now was simply to be a useful assistant to Vault. She resolved to become a top-tier black mage someday so she could one day stand and fight beside him. But by the time she snapped out of her thoughts, Vault and Iris were already long gone. Meanwhile, Vault and Iris arrived at a weapons shop called War God's Victory Song. Vault looked thoroughly impressed by the rows of weapons on display, and the two stepped inside to find what he needed. Seeing Iris walk in with a strange man immediately startled Karin. She hadn't expected Iris to show up with a man, especially one in such suspicious disguise. Calmly, Iris introduced him as Vault, a new adventurer currently under her supervision. Though Karin teased that he might be some distant relative, Iris stayed composed and tried to settle her flustered assistant. Karin had to admit the young man was rather handsome, but business came first. She handed over the freshly sharpened holy sword Mistletoe, reminding them as always to send the bill to the Silver Wolf Knights just like every other time. Curious about Vault's combat style, Karin asked what weapon he typically used. Hearing he favored swords, she enthusiastically showed off this season's newest release, a broadsword from a renowned workshop, marketed as razor-sharp and popular among both beginners and veterans alike. But the moment the sword passed into Vault's hand, something shocking happened. The supposedly sturdy weapon shattered instantly. Karin stood frozen, unable to process her flagship product turning to scrap in seconds, while Iris began to suspect something was off with the sheer scale of Vault's mana flow. Undeterred, they tried another fine sword from a different workshop. The result was the same. It exploded apart the moment Vault tried to channel his power through it. Karin was so stunned she fainted on the spot, unable to bear watching two of her prized weapons get wrecked before her eyes. Amid the chaos, Iris pressed Vault for more details about his past. It turned out his old sword had been forged from a special material called Demon King's Ore, an extraordinary metal able to withstand enormous mana pressure without cracking, even capable of producing various magical effects. The explanation reminded Iris of a legendary weapon from the Eastern lands with similar traits. Forging a sword of that caliber required special magical-grade steel found only in certain mines. Eager, Vault asked if the shop carried any, but Karin firmly told him it was simply too rare for her to stock. Crafting a weapon like that demanded an extremely specialized blacksmith, and unfortunately no one in the capital had that level of skill. Vault realized his path forward had just gotten harder. He'd need to gather the raw materials himself through guild quests and find the right craftsman to forge it. Watching his determination, Iris could only laugh, thinking he finally looked like a true adventurer. But before they could move on, Karin once again demanded compensation for her two ruined swords. When both Vault and Iris offered to pay at the same time, Karin found herself irritated, feeling like she was watching an overly compatible couple play out a scene in front of her. In the end, Karin let it go after catching the rare blush on Iris's face. She promised to personally look into the Eastern sword as a courtesy. Relieved, the pair said their goodbyes and left the weapon shop behind. They made their way into the crowds of the Falma festival, a celebration of thanks to the Earth Goddess for a bountiful harvest. Amid the sea of people, Iris explained the festival's meaning while Vault simply stared, amazed at how many people seemed entirely focused on eating and drinking happily. Iris's attention was suddenly caught by a crepe stand, its aroma irresistible. Vault, having never heard of the dish, looked puzzled but happily offered to treat her once he realized she hadn't brought any spending money that day. While they enjoyed their crepes on a park bench, the warm mood was broken by a voice calling Iris's name with unmistakable respect. A squad of armed soldiers surrounded them, led by a woman who looked equal parts relieved and furious to have finally tracked down her charge. Iris's true identity came out right there in front of Vault. She'd been reported missing, having run off from her responsibilities and leaving her father worried sick. Confused, Vault could only stay quiet, realizing the woman he'd been traveling with was someone far more important than he'd assumed, now caught in the middle of running away. With visible regret, Iris admitted the truth. Her father had ordered her to attend a social debut she dreaded since she'd much rather live freely as an adventurer. That was why she'd fled mid-preparation. Hearing her out, Vault sincerely offered his strength if she ever wanted to fight for what she really wanted. Iris realized that running away forever wasn't a real solution. She decided she'd talk to her father honestly or even cut ties with him if her wishes kept being ignored. Trying to lighten the mood, Vault promised he'd be ready to kidnap her again anytime she needed an escape. A warm smile returned to Iris's face as she accepted the offer. Their brief meeting ended with a quiet, private understanding between them, set against the vast backdrop of a city full of new stories about to unfold. Elsewhere, hidden from sight, something dark was stirring. A sorceress named Dasha was chanting an ancient summoning spell invoking the terrifying realm of Muspelheim, a fire world where only giants could survive. The ritual built toward its peak as she called forth the guardian of that fire-scarred realm from myth. With her staff raised, she unleashed a devastating power said to set the entire world ablaze, an apocalypse known in legend as Ragnarok. The sky turned ominous the instant the spell took hold. Towering above the capital, the legendary fire giant Surtur rose into view, ready to bring total ruin to anyone in its path. Saying a quick goodbye, Eris waved to Ishvalt, unaware of the violent tremor about to rip through the ground beneath them. As panicked citizens screamed for everyone to clear the area, a pitch-black vortex tore open the sky with a deafening roar. From within the vortex, an armored giant emerged, smashing through nearby buildings. Ishvalt, still composed, briefly assumed it was some kind of festival performance, until a sharp warning from a companion snapped him back to reality. Amid the screaming, fleeing crowd, he finally registered that something was seriously wrong. The giant's roar shook the entire city, leaving no doubt in Ishvalt's mind that this threat was real. Watching the destruction unfold, Eris knew they had to act fast before the whole capital was leveled. Despite being warned that she wasn't wearing armor or carrying proper weapons, Eris refused to back down. With total confidence, she revealed a hidden weapon and charged straight into danger, ignoring her friend's pleas to wait. Ludessa arrived on her mount, adding much-needed support to the chaos. But Ishvalt's attention was pulled away by another magic vortex opening overhead, signaling an unexpected arrival. Without warning, the mage Gelda dropped straight into Ishvalt's arms. Though he protested and asked her to get down, she stayed perfectly calm. Curious, he immediately asked her to identify the rampaging giant. Gelda explained the creature was Surtur, a high-tier fire monster summoned through ritual magic. Finding whoever had cast the spell would be difficult, she noted, since they were surely hiding somewhere high up, watching the destruction unfold. Recognizing the stakes, Eris declared they had no choice but to take Surtur down right now. Though Ludessa initially argued this should fall to the Imperial Knights, she eventually backed Eris's call to protect the city. Ishvalt cut their discussion short, reminding them that every second of debate meant more of the city in ruins. Time mattered, he stressed, and they needed a solid plan to take on something this massive. Reflecting on the kindness of the capital's people and the good food he'd found there, Ishvalt realized this place had started to feel like home. He proposed an idea, figuring it was better to act than to keep arguing without doing anything. Meanwhile, Ludessa began firing ranged attacks, trying to draw the giant's attention, but her magic barely scratched its massive frame. She aimed for its joints next, but her attacks simply melted or passed straight through, as if the creature had no solid physical form at all. The lack of progress left them all rattled. Eris tried a direct strike but was met with searing heat so intense it nearly melted her sword. She realized this wasn't an ordinary monster. It was a giant mass of flame given form, not something that could be wounded the normal way. Realizing physical attacks were useless, Eris and Ludessa fell in with Ishvalt's plan. They agreed to act as bait, drawing Surtur's attention so the real strategy could unfold. Burning with determination, Eris unleashed everything she had, activating Schwanen Flugel to show the true strength of a white knight as she worked to halt the giant's rampage. Elsewhere, a companion of Eris's grew anxious as time ticked by. Ishvalt tried to reassure them, insisting they had to trust their friends fighting on the front lines. As planned, the giant's full focus locked onto Eris as she led it on a chase across the city. Atop a tower, Gelda stood ready, waiting for Ishvalt's signal to unleash her counterattack. Eris successfully lured Surtur to the marked location. Seeing the opening, Ishvalt gave the order and Gelda began chanting an ancient incantation, calling on the dark gods to answer her plea. A massive magic circle named Gate of Tartarus opened directly beneath Surtur's feet. Gravity and darkness surged together, locking the giant in place amid violent tremors. Ishvalt praised Gelda's effort in trapping the creature. With the enemy now restrained, he prepared to step forward and finish the fight with everything he had. With total confidence, he declared playtime was over. The declaration was answered by a terrifying roar from the armored giant, as if challenging his nerve. Heavy tremors rocked the battlefield as the monster continued thrashing. Eris took the initiative to clear out the smaller threats swarming nearby, while the others noticed the appearance of salamanders, summoned creatures that shouldn't have been able to call in reinforcements of their own. Eris moved fast, cutting down every threat that closed in, determined not to fall behind. But a fresh shock hit when the creatures began self-destructing in their final moments, sending a flicker of worry across her allies' faces. Fortunately, Eris held her ground, having already picked up on the enemy's attack pattern. Still, the situation stayed dire. Every time their numbers dropped, more salamanders kept appearing, as if determined to overwhelm any barrier in their way. Back in the main fight, taunts were hurled at the giant for moving too slowly. But everything changed the instant they spotted a child trapped in the rubble. Backing away wasn't an option, turning aside would cost the child's life. A brutal collision was unavoidable, the impact triggering an explosion that scorched everything around it. In the middle of the flames, the heat was unbearable, far worse than even the dragon fire he'd faced before. The sight left every onlooker frozen in disbelief. Then, through the smoke, a miracle. Surtur's massive blade had been stopped cold, caught with bare hands. Far from afraid, he laughed openly, treating the lethal strike like nothing more than a joke. To him, the giant's fire felt lukewarm, barely warmer than a sauna back at his old castle. He felt mostly relieved his clothes hadn't burned at all, sparing him the cost of buying new ones. His allies could only wonder if he still counted as human at all, given how absurd his toughness had become. With a single firm grip, he began cracking the massive blade apart. Before long, the seemingly unbreakable weapon shattered completely under his strength. With that threat neutralized, his attention shifted to Rika, trembling on the ground nearby. Casually, he greeted her and asked what she was doing in such a dangerous spot. An idea suddenly struck him. With a wide grin, he asked Rika to lend him her power, a request that left her even more confused and startled. From a distance, Eris stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. She remembered the first time she'd witnessed his strength back at the weapons shop, but what she was seeing now was on an entirely different level. The power on display had completely surpassed anything she'd ever imagined. Turning back to Rika, he felt a pang of exasperation watching her still curled up on the ground. Even as she apologized, calling herself a coward, he found her hesitation more annoying than anything else given how dire the situation was. He told her plainly that since she was already here, helping out was simply her job now. Without giving her room to object, he scooped up the still screaming girl. Carrying Rika casually through a storm of falling fire, he watched his allies fighting hard to hold the summoning circle in place. He even found a moment to tease Rika, who looked on the verge of losing it from sheer terror. But he quickly shifted to something more serious, asking whether she could use water-based black magic against the fire giant. Rika admitted she only knew beginner-level spells like Blizzard and doubted they'd be effective. Still, with full confidence, he praised her talent, reminding her just how much chaos she'd once caused with a single fireball. He reassured her not to worry about their friends, certain they could dodge anything thrown their way. The priority now was simple: get Rika to start chanting. With a steady, reassuring look, he promised to protect her completely. That confidence proved contagious, and Rika finally found the resolve to give it everything she had. The whole situation felt strange. Surrounded by a swarm of salamanders and a raging fire giant, an unexpected surge of courage welled up instead of fear. Amid a relentless rain of molten rock, Ishvalt stood firm, holding Rika close and assuring her there was nothing to fear. At the same time, Rika began chanting an ancient incantation, calling on glacial power from the northern poles and the light of Polaris to cut through the darkness of night. Raising his voice, Ishvalt warned his allies to brace themselves. They were about to unleash a massive counterattack. The announcement sparked confusion among the others, who wondered exactly what reckless plan he had in mind. Eris, hesitant at first, ultimately chose to trust him and wait for the attack, while Ishvalt only smiled faintly, warning them not to regret it later. All focus shifted to Rika, eyes closed in deep concentration, praying to Aquaria, the goddess of water, to answer her call. A moment later, a massive magic circle formed and unleashed a devastating blizzard. The freezing gale roared forward, slamming into the fire giant with enough force to freeze everything in its path instantly. The sight left everyone stunned. This wasn't an ordinary snowstorm, it was a high-tier ice spell known as Diamond Dust. The first-class technique swept across the battlefield, turning the once blazing enemies into helpless statues of ice. Even Gelda, a mage of considerable skill, fell silent, admitting the power rivaled her own black magic. Ishido recognized the extraordinary potential hidden in Rika. Despite still being a level 1 black mage, she just cast a wide-range spell that even back in his homeland, only a handful of people could master. Henrika herself could only stare, stunned by the remarkable talent Rika had just shown. A heavy silence settled over the area as Ishido walked calmly past the frozen ranks of salamanders and the now permanently encased fire giant. With a sigh, Ishido explained the logic behind his strategy. There was apparently a limit to how many salamanders could be summoned at once. By freezing them instead of finishing them off, he'd ensured the enemy couldn't call in replacements. To him, the frozen monsters were now nothing more than oversized, meaningless targets. Ishido then handed Rika off to Eris, intending to finish off the rest of the fight alone. Though Eris tried to stop him, warning against attacking without a plan, Ishido pressed forward with unwavering confidence. Rika quickly warned him that the giant's body was made of pure fire, meaning a half-hearted attack wouldn't do anything. Hearing that, Ishido paused to reconsider, realizing a simple punch might not be enough to bring this particular opponent down. Then, without warning, a blinding flash of light erupted. Ishido froze as he realized every salamander had reacted simultaneously, creating an unexpected anomaly on the battlefield. A massive surge of energy exploded outward, hurling everything into a chaotic vortex of force. Amid the violent shaking, Ishido felt his consciousness slipping, the darkness pulling him down into unconsciousness. In that darkness, an eerily familiar sensation returned, a cold, hollow silence that stirred memories of something he'd lived through before. The shadow of dark wings began creeping into his mind, unlocking memories long sealed away. The flashback carried Ishido back to a battle against the strongest entity in existence. A flash of light identical to the one he'd just seen, a moment that had once made even his past self tremble with fear. In that memory, his enemy laughed uproariously, mocking the heroes for being the truly wicked ones, willing to resort to forbidden arts just to bring him down. The laughter echoed through the ruins, dripping with irony. The enemy admitted utter defeat but refused to let that victory come easily. With the last of its strength, it unleashed one final attack, dragging everything into the void. Ishido now understood fully that moment had been the true cause of his death in his old life. A painful transition, yet also the very key to who he was now. Back then, he'd been ready to lose his life after pouring everything into that final battle. But fate had other plans. The forbidden arts used by enemy sorcerers had hurled him into this world instead. He remembered drawing on his trump card, the ultimate form, meant to bring everything to its end. It turned out the transformation into that ultimate form had never actually stopped. His mind had deliberately severed that memory to shield him from the trauma. A bitter truth now surfaced. Ishido hadn't been reborn as an ordinary human at all. His current body was, in fact, his strongest form, still persisting even now. With a bitter smile, Ishido finally understood the truth he'd kept hidden from himself. He hadn't been reincarnated into another world like some storybook hero. He was simply a warrior dragged into this world by force, carrying with him all the power and burdens of his dark past. The moment Ishido came to, Gelda immediately assessed the situation, concluding their best move now was to clear the obstacle and retreat. But Ishido's focus was elsewhere, on the condition of his friends. The scene around them was chaos. Eris and the others were badly hurt, in urgent need of medical care. Lance, still conscious, registered just how powerful that last attack had been, strong enough to knock him out cold, and felt deep gratitude toward Eris for shielding them all. As Lance lamented not having trained hard enough, Gelda prepared to use her remaining magic to transport everyone to safety. But unexpectedly, Ishido's voice cut in telepathically, stopping her. Gelda was startled. Ishido could communicate through magic again, a power that had returned now that his lost memories were fully restored. He assured her he'd handle the rest himself. Ishido asked Gelda to pour everything she had left into keeping the barrier standing. With a sharpened gaze, he turned toward the remaining monsters, dismissing them as vermin that needed to clear out of his sight. In an instant, Ishido swept away the entire pack of salamanders, leaving Gelda staring in awe at his overwhelming power. Without a hint of fear, he turned to challenge the fire giant Surtur directly, calling out its arrogance. Now, Ishudo prepared to show the true fighting style of the Demon King, Ashley Ishvalt. As he surged forward, he laughed at himself for ever believing he'd been reincarnated as an ordinary human, unknowingly holding back his own power all this time. Eris, just regaining consciousness, could only watch in stunned silence as Ishudo leapt high into the air to challenge the fire giant head-on. A devastating strike landed square against the giant's body. At the same moment, Eris realized something crucial: the gemstone embedded in the creature's body had to be its core weakness. Just as Eris shouted out the warning about the weak point, Ishudo answered with a confident grin, already thinking the exact same thing. With one precise, decisive strike, he struck the gem dead-on, sending cracks spreading across its surface. The force of the blow tore the giant's body apart completely. Eris and the others could only watch, breath caught, as Ishudo landed calmly amid the wreckage of his fallen opponent. Walking away, Ishudo delivered his final remark. To him, the summoned creature's arrogance in looking down on him had been deeply disrespectful right as the giant's gemstone crumbled entirely into dust. 3 days after Surtur's attack, the city was already knee-deep in repairs, clearing out the rubble from all the wrecked buildings. The fox-eared girl was happy to see the rebuild going smoothly, though honestly, all she really wanted was to kick back and relax. Good news first, Lady Eris and the others were healing up nicely thanks to some recovery magic, or at least that's what Gelda reported. As for Lance, who'd taken some nasty hits, it wasn't as bad as it looked. His thick armor had absorbed most of the damage. Sure, his legendary gear was trashed, but they figured the capital's craftsmen could fix it up without breaking the bank. There was some guilt hanging over the group for dragging Lady Eris into danger, and Gelda didn't try to deny it either. Whatever you thought of their strategy, nobody could deny how fast they'd moved when things got hairy. Bottom line, everything got resolved without a single life lost, and that's about as good an outcome as you could ask for. But the conversation soon turned serious, landing on Ishudo and the prophecy about some tyrant king behind yesterday's attack. All they could do now was hope Ishudo wouldn't actually turn into the massive threat everyone was dreading. Elsewhere in the city, the mood was already back to cheerful, like none of that chaos had ever happened. Ishudo, on the other hand, was the exact opposite, mopping in his room while everyone outside was hailing him as their new hero. To him, being called a hero was flat-out embarrassing, since he figured heroes were basically the natural enemy of demon lords. Rika showing up lightened the mood a bit, especially since she'd fully recovered thanks to the reward money she'd got. This girl had jumped straight to level 3, and that was an achievement that had her over the moon. Ishudo praised her ice magic, but she herself couldn't figure out why her own level hadn't budged at all. Turns out no matter how strong the monsters he beat were, Ishudo's status had already hit its ceiling from the start. While he mulled over other ways to grow stronger, Ishudo got curious about how the townsfolk outside were holding up. Good news there too. People had calmed down a lot compared to the sheer panic on day 1. Still, Rika had to wear a hood just to avoid getting mobbed, which Ishudo naturally couldn't resist teasing her about. The elf girl vented that her class had changed, going from a fox-riding archer to something called a chilling elf. Hearing that oddly specific new title, Ishudo could barely hold back his laughter. She got even more depressed, thinking her name now sounded like something off a restaurant menu, but Ishudo joked she was lucky she hadn't ended up with wedding elf instead. Worried her secret might get out, she begged him to keep it quiet before finally asking what he actually needed from her. Out of nowhere, the elf girl dropped to her knees and started apologizing to Ishudo without any warning. It turned out she'd been paid by Guildmaster Verdelaine this whole time to spy on Ishudo's group for money. Instead of getting mad, Ishudo just shrugged it off, since he already knew she was flat broke and constantly hungry. Used to being watched by now, Ishudo stayed relaxed about it, but the elf insisted she wouldn't lie to him again and was done spying for good. Even though Ishudo considered the matter closed, the elf looked far from satisfied and clenched her fists. She lunged forward and threw her arms around Ishudo, unwilling to accept being forgiven that easily. In tears, she begged for some kind of punishment to ease her conscience, practically handing herself over to him completely. Bad timing strikes again. Elsie walked in right then and caught them in what looked like a very compromising position. Elsie's expression darkened instantly from the misunderstanding, sending Ishudo into a full panic trying to explain himself. Thankfully, once he explained, Elsie apologized for jumping to the wrong conclusion about them. Elsie had actually come bearing news about a reward from the guild for Ishudo saving the capital capital from the giant's attack. Elsie found herself even more impressed by how humble Ishido was being, not realizing he simply hated being called a hero. They sat down to talk over the reward, which was really meant to keep Ishido motivated to keep helping out down the road. Elsie floated the idea of moving Ishido out of what she called his cheap inn, which stung a little for him to hear. The reward turned out to be a stay at a 3-star inn, and that news left Rika absolutely stunned. For adventurers, a 3-star inn was basically the peak of luxury, top-tier service and food, no contest. Rika had been happily reading a book about her dream destination when she suddenly got offered the real thing. The offer to actually move into a 3-star inn sent her into a panic over what the cost was probably going to be. Luckily, the guild agreed to cover 3 months of rent as a thank you for saving the capital. Ishido also told the elf girl not to stress too much about the future and just focus on sharpening her magic so she could support herself later. Just like that, their new party was officially formed, and they were handed a map to the inn to go check out right away. The two of them set off through the busy streets to track down the address written on the map. Once they reached the building, Ishido was a little thrown since it looked nothing like the palace he'd been picturing. What really confused him, though, was the sign out front reading Demon Lord's Castle, a name that felt oddly familiar. A staff member named Shiren suddenly greeted them and immediately introduced Ishido as the hero who'd saved the capital. Ishido felt a bit awkward being called a hero, while Shiren started noticing there was someone else standing with him. Shiren assumed the girl was Henrika, the chilling elf, but it turned out everyone just called her Rika. Rika thought the nickname sounded a little strange, but either way, the two of them were invited in for a tour of the place. The moment the door opened, the smell of good food hit them, and Rika was instantly won over by the whole atmosphere. Shiren explained that the ground floor doubled as a restaurant and bar, while their room was tucked in the corner of the second floor, freshly cleaned. The room turned out to be spacious enough to have its own separate living area, which took Ishido right back to his days as Demon Lord. But once they stepped into the bedroom, they were both caught off guard, since there was only one room for the two of them, even though it did have 2 beds. Shiren apologized, explaining this was the only room left thanks to a mix-up with the guild, but Ishido took it all in stride. The moment he heard there was a natural hot spring on the first floor, Ishido perked right up and decided on the spot he was settling in for good. Shiren finally said her goodbyes and left, leaving Rika to start overthinking about having to share a room with a guy. Before she could settle her nerves, Ishido grabbed her hand and asked if she was mentally ready to live under the same roof as him. The guy suddenly brought up having kids someday, and it completely short-circuited the girl in front of him. She felt like that was way too much responsibility for an ordinary person like herself to handle. Meanwhile, all the guy actually wanted to talk about was something practical, and he was baffled watching his friends spiral out of nowhere. Turned out he just wanted to split up the bed space so they wouldn't bother each other at night. He even warned her that crossing into his half of the bed would count as a declaration of war. Lucky for him, she agreed and promised she'd never set foot on his side of the mattress. To be extra safe, they agreed on a verbal non-aggression pact so they could both sleep soundly. Once the room situation was sorted, the guy immediately suggested checking out the hot spring Shiren had shown off earlier. The girl tagged along, still a little sulky since she felt like her charms hadn't gotten any attention at all. But all that irritation melted away the second she felt the warm water, which honestly felt like heaven. Elsewhere, the guy was stuck staring at the pools, torn over which one to pick since there were just too many options. Right as he was deep in thought, a strange flash of light suddenly appeared right in front of him. It turned out to be Krull, popping up out of nowhere without Ludessa anywhere in sight. It didn't take long before Ludessa herself showed up too, arriving at exactly the right moment. Turns out Ludessa had been chasing Krull down after he bolted mid-bath, so caught up in the chase she hadn't even noticed she was still undressed. Apparently that's a signature teleport skill of holy beasts, letting him vanish out of a bathtub in the blink of an eye. Worried Ludessa might catch a cold, the guy told her to go soak back up, but the elf had a different idea brewing. She recommended a hidden hot spring called Flower Hot Spring, one hardly anyone knew about. Once they got there, the guy realized there was only one entrance, which meant this was actually a mixed bath. Without a second thought, Ludessa pulled him right in with her, leaving the guy even more stunned. The girl boldly dragged him into a hot spring that was actually booked for an important night meeting. She just wanted to mess with her friends, even though the guy already had a bad feeling about how this was going to end. In the end, all he could do was resign himself to it and tell the elf she'd better take responsibility if they got caught. Right as he was settling into the water, he caught a whiff of women's perfume perfume nearby just before someone called him out. Panic set in fast since the place was packed with people, and Ishvalt had to introduce himself quick before he got jumped. Instead of a warm welcome, he got smacked with a bucket, mistaken for some kind of pervy intruder. Once Ishvalt explained this was all Ludessa's ridiculous idea, the women finally agreed to cool down a bit. With permission to stay secured, Ludessa went ahead and offered to help scrub the guy down herself. The guy, who came from a noble background, admitted he genuinely wasn't used to bathing without a servant's help. Ludessa saw this as her way of paying him back for saving her during the giant's attack in their last battle. She flat out insisted on scrubbing his back personally, determined to properly show her gratitude. Red-faced, Ishvalt had no choice but to shut his eyes as Ludessa lathered up the soap and got to work behind him. Their conversation started drifting somewhere weird, enough to get the guy's mind wandering in directions it shouldn't. But once the scrubbing actually started, he noticed the texture felt way too rough to be human skin at all. Turned out Ludessa had gotten a white wolf named Krull to scrub him instead, a total prank if there ever was one. In the middle of all that awkwardness, a brown-haired knight warned Ishvalt not to even think about looking at Eris. Ishvalt fired right back, saying if he wanted to peek, he'd rather just look properly than sneak glances. He even went so far as to say the knight's figure was way too good to be wasted just fighting on a battlefield. That so-called compliment landed like an insult, and it sent the knight into a rage, dousing Ishvalt until the whole bath turned into chaos. Once things settled down, Eris asked about the name for the adventuring group they were all planning to form together. In the hot spring, someone floated a team name idea so long and cheesy, it instantly made things awkward. The women could only sigh at the guy's taste in names, which they all agreed was pretty terrible. Meanwhile, our resident genius figured everyone else just wasn't on his level to appreciate his brilliant thinking. He even asked Eris to back him up, only to get shut down hard, told he should never be allowed to pitch a team name alone again. In the end, they agreed to sit down together and hash out a proper name for the party. As they continued on their way, the guy told his elf friend he'd gotten some name suggestions from the adventurers back at the spring. Team Ishvalt actually sounded decent enough to the elf girl, but the guy's taste ran a little differently. He wanted something with more of a demon lord vibe, but their conversation got cut off by a sudden scream. Something had just bitten Rika's leg from the bushes, sending her into a full panic, convinced her end had come. Instead of assuming it was the Grim Reaper, the guy suspected something else was hiding in the foliage. Turned out the culprit was just a girl crawling out of the bushes, begging for help, looking absolutely wrecked. That tense moment left both of them shaken, sure they were about to get ambushed by something dangerous. Even though she looked like a kid, the stranger protested loudly, insisting she was actually a professional adventurer. Seeing her shaking and pale as a ghost, the two decided to carry her back to the capital. She kept complaining about stomach pain, which had the guy worried she might be seriously sick. Plot twist, turns out the girl was just starving, borderline about to pass out from hunger. They ended up at the dining hall of the capital's adventurer guild to deal with the emergency. The girl practically inhaled every dish put in front of her like she hadn't eaten in months. Her insane appetite had the guy starting to sweat about who was going to end up footing the bill. Sure enough, without a hint of shame, a girl named Murabuka Stelvio admitted she didn't have a single coin to her name, officially becoming a drain on the guy's wallet. The 14-year-old had just introduced herself, but she immediately snapped when he tried calling her Murabu, apparently some sore spot from her past. She'd passed out after failing a delivery mission when a pack of monsters ambushed her along the road. The reason was almost too silly. She'd eaten the item she was supposed to deliver because she got hungry hiding up in a tree. Turned out what she'd eaten was some high-end fruit, and Ishvalt figured someone this shameless might just be his toughest opponent yet. Things got livelier when a panicked acquaintance rushed in, relieved to finally find Myra alive. Apparently she'd been missing for a whole week, enough to trigger a dedicated search for this accident-prone item carrier. After Ishvalt got his reward, an elf wondered aloud why Myra was still stuck doing grunt work after 2 whole years. That question set Myra off, since she felt her whole profession had just been publicly trashed. She launched into a lecture for Rika about how item carriers deserved respect, not treatment as some stepping stone for mages. Ishvalt had a simple trick for shutting her up: just stuff her mouth with food and her temper cooled instantly. Between bites, Myra explained her family had been item carriers for generations, backing up top-tier adventurers. Hearing that, Ishvalt flashed back to his own school days, when he'd had to pick a class he considered pretty low tier. Myra boasted that she wanted to change the game entirely and become the strongest item carrier the world had ever seen. Her noise started bothering the restaurant staff, but Myra just kept bragging about how famous her family name was. Ishido cut in, telling her the problem was never her profession, it was just that she personally wasn't very good. Losing the argument, Myra cursed him out, saying he'd never land a girlfriend being that brutally honest all the time. The talk shifted to moving arrangements, which settled Myra back down once she got back to eating. Myra was floored to learn Ishido was the genius rookie who'd taken down that fire giant not long ago. She started pitching her services, arguing their team needed some balance instead of just going all in on offense. Full of confidence, she kept bragging that a good item carrier was way more reliable than any white mage out there. The guy flatly rejected the idea of bringing on a new member, feeling like the two of them were already plenty. Her reaction caught him totally off guard. The maid-dressed girl burst into loud sobbing, leaving her partner completely baffled. Turned out she was venting about how tool warriors always got looked down on and never landed real missions solo. She dreaded having to go back to her fishy-smelling hometown, though the guy had a strong hunch this was all crocodile tears. Rika fell for it completely, since she remembered being in the exact same spot before meeting Ishido. Without a second thought, Rika pushed hard for Ishido to let Murabu join their party right then and there. Ishido hesitated, still worried about the whole stray attack mess with Rika not being resolved, but in the end he just gave in. Just like that, the three of them were official, and the two girls immediately started celebrating their new partnership. Ishido could only watch from a distance, silently marveling at his new teammates' antics. Sure enough, Murabu had put on that pitiful act on purpose, all just to score a ride with the party. Once Rika led their new member off, Ishido settled in for a serious talk with Elsie about how things had just played out. Elsie couldn't figure out why Rika cared so much, when really Ishido just didn't want to feel guilty if something bad happened to the girl. Elsie let it slip that Murabu's supervisor had actually thrown in the towel, worn down by the girl's sheer stubbornness. The issue was she refused to switch jobs, even though everyone kept telling her to retire from being a warrior. Murabu had already gone through 3 supervisors, never finding common ground with any of them about her future. Ishido just shrugged it off, figuring everyone's got their own version of the truth in this world. That bit of wisdom caught Elsie off guard, especially once Ishido confirmed the rumor about Murabu's adventurer status getting pulled. Elsie saw an opening to help and decided on the spot to become the Tool Warrior's new supervisor. Elsie laughed to herself, realizing Ishido was now surrounded by nothing but trouble magnets. But to Elsie, Ishido was still the most complicated one of the bunch, and honestly, that's exactly what made her want to help him even more. With the handover done, the talk turned to compensation for the lost package, and the mood got a bit heavy. Myra suddenly grew suspicious and started wondering if the two of them actually shared the same room. Accused of running some kind of love nest, the elf panicked and denied it hard, trying to head off any more misunderstandings. Ishido stepped in to clarify that their relationship was purely as party members, basically like family at this point. Myra's suspicion faded, but the elf looked a little stung at being written off as just a sibling. The plan was to start taking on quests the next day, testing out Myra's combat style while also training up Rika's magic. To get better prepared, they decided to hit up a second-hand shop Rika recommended for some extra gear. Their destination was the Silver Piglet, a cheap little shop tucked in a back alley, supposedly with surprisingly good stock. The place turned out to be packed, which only convinced Myra further that she'd picked the right spot. They were greeted enthusiastically by Mizette, the shopkeeper, who clearly already knew Myra well. Caught up catching up, Mizette only just realized Myra hadn't come alone this time. Instead of helping them shop, Mizette teased Myra about paid adventurer friendships and how real friendship can't be bought. Myra proudly showed off that she'd finally made a real friend, introducing Ishido as a talented rookie. Rather than being impressed, Mizette got giddy and called Ishido fresh blood for her shop. She even offered him a job on the spot, figuring adventuring was way too risky for people like them. Myra actually liked this shop, but she couldn't handle Mizette's energy, which got a little overwhelming sometimes. Without wasting time, Myra pushed them to finish shopping fast so they could get out of there. While browsing, Ishido asked if anyone had ever been to the Sabum wetlands before. Their target was collecting 10 lizard gems from the venomous reptiles monsters living in the swamp. With the drop rate sitting at just 5%, Ishido figured they'd need to take down at least 200 monsters to get there. Today's plan was pretty ambitious. The guy was aiming for 200 monster kills, which had Rika mentally checking out already. The mission deadline was 6 in the evening, meaning they only had 3 real hours to grind it out. Still, the the main motivation was the cash, since there was a bonus for every lizard gem they managed to collect. Besides, the guy figured this was just light training to see how well the team actually worked together. Chasing that payout, their little expedition kicked off with their feet sinking straight into the mud. Their destination was the Sabum wetlands, a swampy stretch that gave off a pretty eerie vibe. Thankfully, there was a wooden bridge sturdy enough to cross, sparing them from wading through the muck. Myra turned out to be surprisingly nimble crossing the bridge, way more sure-footed than the others. Her secret was a family skill called Good Walker, which made carrying heavy loads feel practically weightless. Myra's pride in being a tool warrior got Rika fired up too, determined to pull her own weight. Even after entering the target zone, there was still no sign of any monsters, and the guy suddenly turned to ask Rika something. The topic was elemental magic theory, specifically how the environment could heavily affect a spell's power. Rika figured water magic would obviously work best somewhere this soggy. Her theory got shot down instantly. He told her to use fire instead, clearly the weakest element for a place like this. His reasoning was to avoid any friendly fire accidents while training her control, while Myra was told to just stand by for healing support. Myra bristled at being reduced to backup healer, right as something started stirring in the swamp. Sure enough, the pack of monsters they'd been waiting for finally showed up, ready to charge all three of them. Instead of waiting for the signal, Myra charged in first to show off her specialized anti-monster hand grenades. She paired the explosive with her already impressive throwing skill. One deadly throw, delivered with full force, was all it took to obliterate the target right in front of her. A massive blast leveled part of the forest, strong enough to send every bird in the area scattering in a panic. Murabu was beaming with pride, finally getting to prove her tool warrior skills were genuinely useful in combat. Her teammates could only stare, stunned, feeling like that attack had been a serious case of overkill. The guy was starting to get a read on her unique ability, but one thing about it still bugged him enough to ask. He couldn't figure out why she'd stayed stuck at level 1 for 2 years if she'd been packing this kind of power the whole time. Turned out the reason was pretty rough. She'd simply been too broke to even afford a hand grenade. Now though, she was confident she could throw just about anything, even legendary tier weapons, if she ever got her hands on one. The guy warned Murabu to hold back a little, since her overkill attacks could throw off Rika's training. Before they could even argue about it, the earlier blast ended up drawing a whole swarm of monsters right to their position. Plans changed on the fly. Rika was told to ready her spells while Murabu was free to use her bombs as needed. Watching them coordinate, the guy felt like they were finally starting to look like a real adventuring team. All three of them charged straight at the monster pack waiting up ahead. Murabu was stunned to see the guy's running speed was flat out beyond anything humanly possible. Moving with practiced ease, the guy deliberately drew every monster's attention so they'd all bunch together in one spot. Once their positions were locked in perfectly, he gave Rika the signal to strike. Rika unleashed a massive fireball that instantly swallowed up the entire cluster of monsters. The hit landed clean, though Murabu's focus was still stuck on the guy's insane speed, something she could barely wrap her head around. The guy noticed that Rika's magic had gotten noticeably stronger compared to when they'd first met. Rika guessed it was from that fruit she'd eaten, while Murabu started getting chills, sensing the guy's physical power was way beyond normal. She finally realized Rika was traveling alongside someone whose strength rivaled the great heroes of the capital. Watching the two of them work so well together, the girl realized that sticking with this pair was her fastest path to getting stronger. She made up her mind then and there to not be a burden and to grow as fast as she possibly could on this adventure. The problem was her teammates' power was way too dangerous to get close to carelessly, unless she wanted to catch some collateral damage. While mixing a potion, she marveled at how the dark-haired guy stayed cool and dry even after a fight that intense. Trying to help, she launched her go-to move, chucking a potion straight at Ishvalt. His reflexes were no joke. Ishvalt dodged, and the potion ended up shattering on a monster behind him instead. As a result, the enemy got a free heal from the potion, which of course kicked off an argument between the two of them. She figured it was an efficient healing technique, but for Ishvalt, getting beamed in the head with a glass bottle still felt plenty dangerous. After going back and forth over healing methods, Ishvalt finally admitted the truth about his unusual condition. Turned out his entire body was coated in a magical barrier that made him completely immune to both physical and magical attacks. He added that his memories had only just come back after he'd blacked out during a major fight before. The catch was that barrier also blocked outside healing magic entirely, meaning he had to drink potions himself for them to work. Rika thought it was a pretty cool ability, but Myra still insisted throwing potions was way more practical in emergencies. Ishido finally asked Myra to stop lobbing bottles at him, since drinking the potion normally would heal way better anyway. That ban instantly crushed Myra's pride as a combat item specialist. Turned out the real reason ran deeper. Throwing bottles was literally Myra's only way of blowing off stress. She even admitted there was a weirdly satisfying feeling in hearing a bottle shatter against someone's head, which was, frankly, a little concerning. Sobbing dramatically, Myra begged him not to fully ban her bottle-throwing habit now that she'd finally found a team. Unable to stand the drama anymore, Ishido caved and allowed the move, but only in genuinely critical situations. 2 hours later, the monster cleanup wrapped up with results that left this oddball little team pretty satisfied. After taking down 300 monsters, the guy agreed to start collecting loot, especially since their item carrier considered this her specialty. The elf girl told the guy to just rest while she went to help the item carrier gather up their haul. They figured they still had enough time to make it back to the capital, though the guy wasn't thrilled about the idea of a mad dash home at the end. Turned out the pocket watch the elf girl had rented cost as much as a mansion, so they really had to keep an eye on the clock during this quest. While the other two were hard at work, the guy decided to sit back for a bit and enjoy some downtime. Time ticked by and they should have already been heading back, but a strange sound from the trees started raising red flags. Just as Ishido called out for Rika and Murabu, a scream for help suddenly cut through the quiet forest. A giant reptile monster came crashing out of nowhere, viciously chasing after the two girls. Ishido told them to keep running while he moved to face down a high-ranked monster the guild apparently had no record of. With razor-sharp reflexes, Ishido managed to dodge just as the monster lunged to snap him up. He landed a clean hit straight to its eye, but this thing had surprisingly tough defenses. The monster let loose a cloud of toxic gas, forcing Ishido to yell for his friends to hold their breath and clear the area fast. Once they made it to a safe distance, they could finally breathe easy again, even though the lingering stench from the gas was awful. The maid tried to play it cool, downplaying the monster, even though she'd been running for her life just moments earlier. The relaxed mood vanished instantly when the maid admitted she ditched their loot bag earlier just to buy time while being chased. Rika jumped in to defend her, pointing out that quick call was exactly what let all of them get away safely. Rather than getting angry, Ishido gave her a sincere compliment which left the maid blushing and flustered on the spot. With the gas finally clearing, Ishido planned to head back and grab their gear before heading home to the capital. But out of nowhere, Murabu suddenly collapsed, and Rika followed right after, both losing consciousness in a way that felt off. Ishido started to panic since fighting was really the only thing he knew, and he had zero medical skills to help them. The monster's venom was starting to shut down the girl's body, and on top of that, their supply bag had been crushed under the monster's foot. On the edge of death, she felt like she'd failed as a protector and resigned herself to the end, while the guy scrambled to figure out any way to save her. In her critical state, the girl suddenly told him to lift up her skirt, which he almost mistook for a badly timed joke. Turned out there was a hidden potion belt strapped to her thigh, thankfully still intact and usable. She had an antidote, but the supply was extremely limited, right when the guy was hopping to save both girls at once. The problem was there was only one dose left, and the girl insisted it not be used on herself. She begged for the last dose to go entirely to the unconscious Rika instead of wasting time trying to save her own life. Fighting through the pain, she looked back on her past as a failed adventurer, always falling short, never wanted in any group. In her final moments, she felt genuinely grateful. At least she'd gotten to meet them and feel a brief moment of real happiness. She was ready to die enduring the pain if it meant Rika survived, finally feeling like she'd made herself useful to her team. Deep down though, what she really wanted more than anything was to keep adventuring with this team a little longer. To her surprise, the guy handed the potion straight to her, claiming Rika had already had her share. He made it clear that her little act of self-sacrifice would only leave Rika devastated if she found out she'd died to save her. The girl stayed stubborn, convinced it was impossible for the guy to carry both of them all the way back to the capital, which was still far off. Fed up with being turned down, the guy threatened to just pour the potion down her throat himself if she kept refusing. Panicked, the girl chugged the whole thing down, while the guy assured her both of them were officially part of his team now. He gave her his absolute word that he'd never leave a single teammate behind, no matter what happened. Without missing a beat, he scooped up both girls at once and got ready to sprint full speed back to the capital. The girl was left slack-jawed as the guy took off running moving at a speed that made zero sense for a human being. Next thing she knew, she woke up on a clinic bed, relieved to see Rika safe right beside her. The blonde girl finally came to and immediately wondered if they'd actually made it out alive. Ishido came in to check on her, letting her know her friend was still unconscious in the next bed over. Even with the antidote already given, the paralysis hadn't fully worn off, so Ishido told her to stay still for now. She assumed she'd been out for days, but Ishido told her she'd only been unconscious for 3 hours. Things got even more confusing once she learned Ishido had covered a 2-hour trip in just 3 minutes. With a totally straight face, he admitted he was actually the Demon Lord, which was why he could move that fast. Instead of being scared, the girl got mad and told him to knock off the nonsense since it could jeopardize their mission. Things got trickier when she let slip that the gemstones from their hunt hadn't actually been stored in the bag. Turned out the valuables had been hidden in her underwear, and the so-called Demon Lord was about to just casually go grab them without a second thought. Ishido wanted to move fast since the girl was totally paralyzed and no nurse happened to be around to help. Even though Ishido swore he had zero interest in a kid like that, the girl still screamed bloody murder at his blunt approach. Luckily, Elsie showed up at just the right moment to check in and save the patient's dignity from that awkward mess. Thanks to Elsie's help, the gem retrieval got sorted out and their mission was officially declared a big success. As a way of celebrating their recovery and their earnings, Ishido decided to treat everyone to a big feast. Over the meal, it hit them just how lucky they'd been to survive that whole unexpected ordeal. More good news, the giant lizard monster they'd beaten was officially recognized as a brand new species. In the middle of all the eating and celebrating, Ishido suddenly remembered one important thing they still hadn't sorted out. He asked his 2 teammates what they thought about naming their group Team Ishido, figuring simple was best. They both agreed without much fuss, since Ishido's name as a hot new rookie was already great for promotion. With their team name officially locked in, they kept celebrating this fresh start with a toast of wine. At the tavern, everyone raised a glass to the newly formed Team Ishido, a name simple enough to be considered a genuinely wise call. The veterans there laughed with satisfaction, figuring a normal, sensible team name would spare the guy some embarrassment down the road. The relaxed mood shattered the moment Royal Knights suddenly stormed in looking for someone named Merida. Patrons panicked at the sight of elite knights hunting a level 10 adventurer until a girl nervously stepped forward. The bespectacled girl admitted she was Merida, even as the knight captain sized her up doubtfully, unconvinced by her unassuming look. Without any preamble, the captain went straight for the accusation, connecting Merida to the Surtur giant attack that had rocked the capital. Another knight pressed her on whether she'd really released the monster inside the city, which had Ishido's group racing nervously. Merida insisted it was just a misunderstood rumor, but the knights claimed they had solid eyewitness reports backing it up. Apparently, the night before the attack, Merida had been overheard at a tavern boasting she'd burn the capital to ashes. With so many witnesses against her, all Merida could do was cry and admit she'd just been drunk and heartbroken, talking nonsense. She tried to explain it was purely venting frustration, but the mustached knight stayed suspicious and refused to let her go. Merida defended herself on technical grounds, arguing her level wasn't nearly high enough to summon something as strong as Surtur without years more training. The captain argued she could be hiding her true strength, then ordered her taken in for further questioning. The arrest went ahead despite Merida shouting that the knights were acting completely out of line. Tavern patrons started murmuring that it seemed impossible for a level 10 adventurer to pull off a summoning that powerful alone. Ishido, who'd been watching the whole thing quietly, sensed something was off with the knight's reasoning and decided to step in. Ishido suddenly interrupted the arrest, claiming he'd heard the entire conversation from earlier. In his view, drunken ramblings weren't real evidence, and the knights were just wasting time while the actual culprit got off free. The furious captain demanded to know who he was, and Ishido casually replied he was just an adventurer who cared about how tax money got used. The captain's jaw dropped even further when Ishido confidently pulled out his adventurer card, revealing he was still level 0. The old knight blew up at the idea of a level 0 adventurer talking back, but the guy stayed calm and just told him to check with the guild if he was so curious. The knight suddenly realized this young man was Ishido, the rookie rumored to have handled the giant incident with his bare hands. They still doubted whether he could really be the genuine Ishvalt Aslay, since his appearance didn't exactly scream powerful hero. The whole room burst out laughing, mocking the idea that this skinny kid had taken down a fire giant on the level of Surtur. Fed up with the noise, the guy guy started channeling his magic, ready to teach these disrespectful people a lesson. The effect was instant. The knights panicked, feeling like they were being swarmed by insects, their vision going completely dark. In reality, though, they'd all dropped to the floor, bowing the second the guy was ready to give an order. Told to look up, the knights were shocked stiff at the figure suddenly standing before them. Turned out he'd cast an illusion spell, making his targets see whoever they respected most in the world. In the eyes of these imperial knights, the guy had transformed into King Lehar himself, and their nerve instantly crumbled. The guy leaned into the act, playing the part of a real king, testing his elite soldiers' loyalty through a single command. Without mercy, he ordered them all back to base while hopping like rabbits the whole way as a show of devotion. Hilariously, they obeyed without question, while one female knight just stood there stunned watching her comrades leave. Turns out this knight was the only one immune to the hypnosis, and she had no clue why she was the sole one still sane. The reason was simple. She was the only one who hadn't laughed along at the guy earlier, so she didn't need to share in the humiliation. The girl finally admitted her team hadn't done enough research and chose to retreat rather than let things drag on any further. The guy just told her to hurry up and catch up with her friends, still busy hopping around like rabbits outside. Once the place quieted down, the guy already regretted using his demon lord powers over something this trivial again. But instead of judgment, the whole bar crowded around him, impressed by the unique trick he'd just pulled off. Even with the crowd cheering him on, the guy's attention drifted to a group of strong-looking adventurers in the corner, right before the bespectacled girl came over to thank him. With her reputation trouble easing up, the glasses-wearing girl said her goodbyes after getting help while she'd been dead drunk. Meanwhile, the guy just sat quietly, watching the crowd bustle around him. Elsewhere, Merida walked alone, brooding over the string of bad luck that kept following her lately. Turned out she'd just gotten her heart broken, having fallen for a teammate who was already engaged, a classic recipe for heartbreak. Still nursing that fresh wound, a mysterious voice suddenly called her name in the quiet alley. Merida spun around on guard the moment someone asked for a moment of her time. The figure that appeared was a girl in a black dress, standing calmly blocking her path. The girl, named Darsha, introduced the doll on her shoulder, named Asmodeus, as part of her family. Merida had first assumed it was just a plush toy shaped like a sheep until she was floored to hear it actually talk. Darsha apologized for startling her, though her body language gave off a distinctly unsettling vibe. It was only once she noticed how eerily quiet everything had gotten that Merida realized she was trapped inside a magic barrier. Darsha smiled coldly, warning that it would all be over quickly now that Merida was completely isolated. The doll, Asmodeus, was ordered into action and suddenly began growing into a terrifying monster. Cornered under the shadow of the giant monster, all Merida could do was cry, mourning just how rock bottom her luck had got. In sharp contrast to all that, our protagonist was off happily digging into a meal. He was hanging out with his teammates, raving about the sandwiches from the Demon Lord's Castle Inn, which were genuinely amazing. One of his friends started talking about her dream of becoming a legendary item master, just like in the fairy tales she'd grown up with. After a bit of back and forth, they hurried off, not wanting to miss Roswace's arrival. Townsfolk buzzed with excitement as the procession of Silver Wolf Knights and their scout squad rolled in, looking seriously impressive. Amid all the cheering, Eris appeared decked out in knight's armor, an image that stopped everyone in their tracks. The crowd went wild the moment they spotted Eris leading the front line alongside the other elite adventurers. Ishudo himself hadn't expected the scout team to get paraded through town in full battle gear like this. In the middle of all the parade excitement, Eris took a moment to wave out to the crowd. That little wave caused a stir, since Eris wasn't exactly known for being warm toward ordinary people. Elsie suddenly popped up to greet Ishudo and the others, showing off her more casual new outfit. Casually, Ishudo asked what the whole reason behind this massive elite adventurer parade even was. Turned out this was the third specialized scout team formed for the latest dungeon conquest mission. These big expeditions happened regularly, just like the one that had first found Ishudo at the shrine a year ago. Their target was the Witch's Labyrinth, the one region in the kingdom that still hadn't been conquered. Noticing her friends looked confused, Elsie offered to explain the details of this dangerous place. Dungeons built by witches had a nasty reputation, packed with brutally complex traps. What really caught Ishudo's interest was that the maze's whole layout completely reshuffled every 9 days. Even though Ishudo was itching to tag along, Elsie, as his supervisor, flatly shut down that reckless idea. Their conversation had to wrap up early since Elsie needed to head off before the parade officially ended. ended. Merida appeared in the procession, and her sheer beauty had everyone completely transfixed on the spot. Even with lingering rumors about her past, the crowd preferred to just admire how far she'd come. Murabu got chills watching her, while Ishido sensed the woman's aura felt completely different from their encounter the night before. Ishido stayed wary, especially since all she gave him was a thin, secretive smile. Out of nowhere, the woman sent a telepathic message, greeting Ishido as the one and only demon lord. The parade rolled on and out of sight, leaving Ishido still baffled by that voice and the creature perched on the mysterious woman's shoulder. The guy suddenly got a bad feeling the moment he heard the words demon lord. Meanwhile, their group had made their way into Gracio's, a mysterious puzzle-filled labyrinth built by a witch. The girl felt like they'd already pushed pretty deep into the cave at this point. The problem was it had taken 9 days just to reach the 4th floor, and in 2 more hours, the entire dungeon layout would automatically reset. Even though the rear group was safe, Eris felt like all their effort would be wasted if the map scrambled again. Her friend disagreed, pointing out they'd already scored a ton of valuable loot and taken down 3-floor guardians. She was practically giddy about adventuring alongside Eris, hyper enough that it was starting to make the fairy uncomfortable. Amid some pointless chatter about, of all things, chest size, they realized just how much had happened over their 9 days here. Bottom line, they felt this whole adventure had been worth it, thanks to their teamwork cracking puzzles and beating guardians. Eris asked Gelda whether escaping would even be possible if they were running late, worried all their progress would just vanish. Gelda explained that no one had ever survived the dungeon's automatic renovation system, which is exactly why it earned the nickname the Man-Eating Labyrinth. So they really needed to get out before their time ran out, unless they wanted to become the dungeon's next sacrifice. Gelda figured the 4th floor probably wasn't the last one, since witches tended to be obsessed with specific numbers. Instead of getting discouraged, Eris got even more fired up hearing there was still a long way to go, despite her body already feeling worn out. This dungeon had apparently only appeared 30 years ago, and Eris was curious just who this powerful witch behind it might be. Gelda had a few suspects in mind, but she was confident the creator had to be a witch with power far above average. She even suspected the labyrinth's creator shared a certain perverted streak with a particular fox lady she knew. What really got on her nerves was this place's bizarre rule, banning teleport magic while still allowing magic items. Gelda figured this whole magic versus item double standard was designed on purpose just to mess with anyone who wandered in. With everyone in the rear group finally gathered, Gelda decided to light the way so they could keep moving. In this grand hall, a crowd of explorers gathered, waiting for something to emerge from the altar at the center. The short-haired girl realized they'd reached the edge of the 4th stratum right as a surge of energy began building. Sure enough, a massive dragon, the guardian of this floor, descended to greet its uninvited guests. This was Burgunt, the tyrant stone dragon, big enough to make an ordinary person's blood run cold. But for the elf and her team, this fight was actually the payback moment they'd been waiting for all along. Armed with her new weapon, the blonde girl felt confident this battle wouldn't end in tragedy like the last one. Commanding her squad, she gave the order to charge together and leave no one behind. Fired up, the whole group surged forward, determined to make it home to the capital safely. Rewinding 2 days earlier, the maid was throwing a fit over something, giving Ishido a headache just trying to follow along. Turned out she was upset that not a single tool warrior had made the scout squad roster. To cool things down, the elf steered the conversation toward their next mission at Lucas Hill, which honestly sounded more like a tourist spot. They hoped to cross paths with the scout team along the way, while Ishido just sat back sipping his tea. The talk shifted when the elf got curious whether Ishido knew anything about Merida, a fairly famous summoner adventurer. Merida was the solo career type, only joining groups when needed, even though her summoning technique took a long time to cast. The maid suddenly got touchy, feeling like the tool warrior profession was being talked down in this conversation. The gist of it was that Merida was a genius but unlucky, always getting blamed whenever a disaster or giant monster showed up. The maid doubled down, accusing Ishido of only saving Merida because of some romantic motive. Even after Ishido told her to just go to sleep since they had an early start tomorrow, the maid stayed lost in her own little romance fantasy. Still, there was one thing nagging at Ishido's mind, something to do with a particular title. Looking over Merida Ebro's profile, Ishido wondered why she'd addressed him as Demon Lord through that telepathic message. The battle finally wrapped up, and even completely winded, the blonde girls group had managed to take down the tough enemy in front of them. Luckily, nobody got hurt, but the blonde still couldn't help thinking thinking things would have gone way smoother if a certain guy named Ishudo had been there. Her teammate immediately snapped back, insisting they didn't need any help from some useless guy like that. The blonde just smiled, picturing Ishudo's fighting style, which she found weirdly stylish, only annoying her friend even more. The hatted mage praised the blonde's progress, though they both knew it had still taken a full hour just to barely pull off the win. The elf girl suggested the blonde stop taking things so seriously and just enjoy this victory while it lasted. She'd already gotten cocky enough to want to push on to the 5th floor, even though everyone else was completely out of time. They decided to head back, figuring their exploration so far had already proven just how deep this dungeon really went. The blonde told her squeaky-voiced teammate to go ahead and announce that they'd successfully reached the 4th floor. The announcement was met with cheers, since their scouting mission had officially wrapped up as a huge success. Evacuation began right away, prioritizing the injured through transport stones to avoid wasting any time. Once only 5 of them remained, a sudden bad feeling crept in, and the whole mood shifted tense in an instant. The elf panicked after recounting everyone and realizing one person had mysteriously gone missing from the group. They were confused about who could be missing since all the core members were right there, but the mage's gaze had already locked onto one direction. The mage told whoever was hiding to quit playing games, and a silhouette stepped out of the shadows. It turned out to be a woman in black with a doll on her shoulder, radiating a seriously dangerous aura. The blonde immediately recognized her as Merida Ebro, the summoner soldier whose reputation was no joke. The woman casually claimed her little stunt of hurting their own teammate was just a light punishment for their overfamiliarity. Furious that her friend had been badly hurt over something so petty, the mage squared up, ready for a fight. Without wasting more words, she started unleashing her power to face the threat standing right in front of her. A bright flash lit up the magic circle, signaling the arrival of an uninvited guest who instantly stole Gelda's attention. The witch admitted she'd been careless, having to perfectly mimic the soldier Merida's appearance for this whole plan. That confession left everyone stunned, having no idea there had been an imposter wearing that face the whole time. Despite looking like some fragile, pretty doll, the aura radiating off this new girl felt seriously dangerous and unnerving. Tension spiked further as the monster beside them started growling warily at how murky the situation had become. Without any preamble, the newcomer introduced herself as Darsha, daughter and sole student of the Great Witch Brigand. Her friendly greeting felt painfully ironic given how tense things had just got. Darsha reaffirmed her lineage as a descendant of that legendary, widely known witch. Gelda just stared her down in silence, trying to process this girl's sudden claim. Memories of Brigand's prophecy book, the one Gelda was carrying, started connecting the dots on Darsha's identity. Showing off her cute side, Darsha introduced the little doll in her hand, revealing it was actually a familiar named Asmodeus. Who would have guessed the doll could talk? It nearly gave the elf and her friend a heart attack. Gelda started grilling Darsha on whether her claimed blood ties to the witch Brigand actually held up. The issue was, as far as Gelda knew, someone as powerful as Brigand shouldn't have had any family, let alone a child. Darsha just laughed lightly, saying the world was too vast for an old witch like Gelda to fully understand. Gelda's sharp eyes recognized Darsha's staff as one of Brigand's rare pieces, once wielded by the legendary warrior Vesaurus. Combining a top-tier warrior's skill with that enchanted staff meant Darsha could summon practically any monster she wanted. Gelda finally pieced it together. Darsha was the mastermind behind Surtur, the fire giant that had wreaked havoc earlier. Darsha praised her mother's rival for her sharp thinking, though Gelda just mocked Brigand as a stalker who was never on her level anyway. That insult sent Darsha into a rage, though Gelda stayed cool and unbothered, seemingly unfazed by the threat in front of her. The girl started pressing for the reason behind all her opponent's chaos, from unleashing the giant Surtur to disguising herself as a summoner soldier. The blonde girl just mocked her right back, telling the witch to figure it out herself. It came out that this had all just been a side game, since she had no intention of letting anyone conquer this dungeon except herself. Plot twist, turned out the blonde girl's mother, the witch Brigand, was the one who'd built this entire dungeon. She even mocked the team for taking so painfully long just to reach the 4th floor, which set Ludessa off instantly. The blonde was curious why Gelda didn't just use her full power to blast straight through to the deeper levels alone. Gelda got mocked for supposedly downgrading herself to babysitter duty, even though they'd already burned a lot of precious time before the reset kicked in. Cool as ever, the blonde girl decided she'd rather just stay in the dungeon, feeling safe under Asmodeus's protection. She said her goodbyes and headed off since the path to the 5th floor was now open, not caring one bit about Gelda's team's fate. But before she could really leave, one of them stopped her to ask whether the real Merida was still alive somewhere. Turned out the blonde hadn't killed her. She'd only taken a copy of Merida's body to perfectly replicate her appearance. Merida's whereabouts were now unknown, and the blonde just hoped someone lucky enough would eventually stumble across her. Hearing that Merida could die if she wasn't found soon, the blonde just laughed, brushing them all off as way too soft-hearted. Right as she was about to actually leave, a loud rumble suddenly echoed from the structure behind her. Careless as ever, she realized she'd forgotten to finish the last part of her spell, forcing her to turn back and wrap things up properly. In the end, she really did summon Cerberus, the hound of the underworld, to serve as this team's opponent. Once the monster physically materialized, the blonde girl officially made her exit, leaving them all to deal with the chaos. Unluckily, the pterosaur gem Rudessa had planned to use for an escape crumbled to dust before it could even be activated. Gelda realized too late that Cerberus had a passive skill preventing enemies from fleeing, on top of insanely high resistance to any kind of magic. Things were getting more critical by the second. Teleport magic band, their escape item destroyed, and barely any time left before the dungeon reset. In the middle of the fierce fight, the girl swore she wouldn't give up, all for Ishido's sake, hoping there was still a chance for them to survive. Meanwhile, back at the Lucas Hill camp, Ishido was relaxing when he suddenly sensed something was off in the direction of the crowd. His friends were busy enjoying a barbecue and wondered why Ishido had zoned out, even though the whole place was buzzing despite it not even being a holiday. The night had a festival-like energy thanks to the sudden crowd of guests that had gathered there. Turned out the crowd was there to welcome back the scout squad from Gracio's, Eris included in that returning group. Since Gracio's entrance was close by, they figured it was the perfect time to watch the teams return in person. Besides, the dungeon's layout reshuffled every 7 days, so the scout squad had to get out and set up camp there anyway. Ishido got teased for caring so much about Eris, though he brushed it off, claiming he just wanted to repay her for all the help since back in the Lehar Kingdom days. To him, everything they'd done for him was more than enough reason to keep looking out for the team's safety. Their relaxed evening got cut short when a scream for help suddenly shattered the calm at the campsite. Chaos broke out as several lizardfolk soldiers stumbled in, badly beaten up, desperately begging for water. Ishido recognized them as part of the squad that was supposed to have returned home safely. The soldier was startled to see Ishido there, while Ishido himself was confused how a total stranger already knew his name. Turned out Ishido's reputation as the hero who'd helped the Silver Wolf Knights take down Surtur had already spread across the whole capital. After Ishido apologized for snapping at him earlier, the soldier stressed there was a serious emergency that needed to be reported to the guild right away. The bad news was that Eris and her teammates had ended up stranded inside the dangerous Gracio's dungeon. Basically, the 3rd scout squad had been forced to retreat, leaving Eris and the other knights trapped inside on their own. Things were getting critical since it was already past midnight, meaning the dungeon's automatic reset had already kicked in. Once the dungeon fully reset, even finding their location, let alone rescuing them, would become basically impossible. With no other options left, the 2 lizardfolk soldier brothers ran off to find help before it was too late for Eris's team. A supervisor arrived carrying a magic communication device to help coordinate everyone who'd gathered there. Inside was a crystal ball that needed a shot of mana to activate, and this was the first time Ishido had ever seen tech like it. Once it lit up, a projection appeared from the guild's main branch, and Ishido found this whole long-distance communication setup surprisingly convenient. Turned out the person on the line was Elsie, but the warm greeting turned tense fast once the lizard man reported the emergency. The Silver Wolf Knights were trapped inside a dungeon mid-reset, meaning help had to be sent immediately before it was too late. The guild director suddenly appeared on screen, completely drunk, even though the news coming in was dead serious. While the lizard man felt relieved to see their boss, Ishido had his doubts about a director who could barely stand up straight from all the alcohol. Rather than sobering up, the director just insisted being drunk was her normal state, leaving Ishido even more frustrated searching for a real solution. Thankfully, once reminded about the rest of the crew's struggle, the director started taking things more seriously, realizing Gelda's safety was on the line. As the guild's official representative, she finally gave the firm order for the entire scout team to head home before dawn. That order immediately drew sharp protest from the lizard man, who felt like they were being told to abandon their own comrades. The director held her ground, reasoning that that sending an already exhausted team back in would only add more names to the casualty list. Even as the lizard man kept pleading to repay his debt, Ishido suddenly cut into the conversation with a spontaneous decision. Without a moment's hesitation, he announced he'd head into the dungeon alone. His mind was made up. He was going to bring Eris and her friends back safely. He assured the stunned director that he still had more than enough stamina and mana to pull off a solo rescue. Knowing full well that Ishido often pulled off the impossible, the director decided to trust him with this seemingly hopeless mission. The emergency mission was officially handed off, and Ishido took on the heavy task with a confident smile. The whole camp sprang into action, scrambling to prepare potions, food, and crystal lamps for Ishido's departure. Behind that tough exterior, the director really just didn't want to lose people she cared about deeply. The no-nonsense boss refused to abandon those kids and immediately handed Ishido the rescue mission. His task was straightforward: carry out an emergency rescue of the Silver Wolf Knight squad right now. Without a shred of hesitation, the guy accepted the mission he'd basically been waiting for. Once they got the green light, this small rescue party got ready to head out right away. The director and her staff could only see them off, praying for the team's safety. There was some worry since Rika and Murabu, both still fairly low level, were insisting on joining the brutal Gracio's dungeon rescue. Even with prep time razor thin, the director understood why they couldn't just sit around waiting at headquarters. Both girls were adamant about helping Ishido out as one united team. The director realized just how happy Ishido looked, getting this kind of full support from his teammates. The boss got a little too excited watching them, to the point someone had to remind her to calm down. In the end, they agreed Ishido was seriously lucky to have such a solid crew around him. Stretching a bit, the director told her staff to handle the paperwork while she thought up a special reward for Ishido. She genuinely believed this team had what it took to pull off even the most impossible missions. Once they arrived near the dungeon, they found a crowd from different factions already arguing amongst themselves. Out of nowhere, the holy beast Krull appeared from who knows where and charged straight at the guy. Krull showing up alone without any of his usual teammates definitely caught everyone there off guard. The problem was, Krull's unique ability could only teleport himself, nobody else. Turned out this dungeon had a mechanism sealing off group teleportation magic, even for powerful mages. But that seal didn't apply to magic items, so they figured the other team must have escaped using a pterosaur gem. If that theory held up, Eris's group should have had one of those gems too, as their safety net. Since the other team's pterosaur gem couldn't be used, the guy finally understood why no backup had shown up yet. With no clear map of the labyrinth to go on, all they could do now was rely on Krull's nose to track down Eris and Ludessa as fast as possible. The Dragon Knight finally placed his squad's fate in Ishido's hands, seeing this rookie as their only real hope. Full of confidence, Ishido promised he'd finish the mission and told them to just wait for his return. The moment they stepped into Gracio's, they were greeted by the roar of a massive monster guarding the depths of the cave. The powerful tremor echoing from inside instantly terrified his female teammates. A sudden attack from the dungeon's resident monster triggered a huge explosion along the path ahead of them. Ishido casually mowed down high-ranked monsters one after another, while his teammates started realizing this place was way too dangerous for their level. Rika was shaking badly and nearly lost her nerve, even though she was technically the team's dark mage. She got warned not to carelessly cast fire spells in a narrow tunnel unless she wanted to suffocate herself. Earth magic was off the table too, since it would just bury them alive, a basic bit of logic this rookie mage was only now realizing. Ishido didn't need any fancy spells to wreck a monster. One clean punch was enough to instantly shatter his opponent. His next attack was even more efficient, a single lightning-fast slash that wiped out everything in front of him. Standing calmly atop a pile of defeated monsters, Ishido made it clear to his friends that their only job now was to keep following behind him. What should have been a brutal battlefield instead turned into a total wipeout thanks to Ishido's ridiculous strength. Impressively, he treated the whole fight like nothing more than light exercise to help digestion and shake off a hangover. While Ishido was checking on his friends, Krull suddenly barked and took off running deeper into the dungeon. There was a good chance Krull had picked up Ludessa's scent, meaning Eris's group might still be alive somewhere. Ishido immediately challenged his two teammates to see if they could keep up with him as he picked up the pace even more. Feeling the challenge, both girls were determined to follow him straight through to hell if that's what it took to finish this rescue. They'd only just started when they hit a dead end, which put a small dent in their earlier momentum. His friend suggested using a grenade, but the guy preferred to save save it for a real emergency. He told Krull to back off for a moment while he got ready to do something about the stone wall blocking their path. With no tools at all, he brought the wall down with a single solid punch, leaving his friends completely stunned. His reasoning was simple. Barehanded was way safer than risking a cave-in from magic or explosives. From there on, their journey basically turned into a demolition run, smashing through walls, floors, and ceilings alike. The girl could only sigh watching the dungeon get conquered the brute force way, by smashing through absolutely everything in the way. Meanwhile, the elf was starting to figure out an effective fighting style to complement his reckless attack style. She tried casting lightning to protect Ishudo, though her attack nearly hit her own teammate instead. Even with that near miss, Ishudo brushed it off and told her to just stay focused on her counterattacks. Despite smashing through tons of rock, their destination still wasn't in sight, but luckily Myra's potion stock kept everyone fresh. Ishudo praised Myra's physical stamina, boosted heavily by her walking skill even while lugging around a ton of gear. He even openly admitted Myra had real potential to become a great item master someday. The sudden compliment left Myra flustered, her face turning bright red on the spot. Oblivious as ever, Ishudo told her not to be shy and promised he'd help her chase that dream whenever she needed. While Myra renewed her resolve to get stronger, Ishudo went right back to smashing through the stone wall ahead of them. His final punch broke straight through the wall, revealing an empty dimension that looked deeply unnatural. Casually, he explained that normal physics didn't apply in this dimension, which only sent his friends into more of a panic. Already used to weird, empty spaces like this, he told Krull to go ahead and sniff out the way forward. The moment Krull leaped into the darkness, they had no choice but to jump in right after him, screaming the whole way down. The girl had already made up her mind to finish whatever she started, not caring about the risks ahead. Her steps came to a sudden stop as a giant three-headed monster loomed ready to pounce from the darkness. In the middle of the panic, Ludessa used her gravity magic to hold back the labyrinth's trap, giving Eris a chance to move. Things got worse fast as a giant beetle started devouring the whole area, cutting their remaining time even shorter. With their defenses about to give out, Lanceluna stepped up, confident she could wrap up this fight quickly. She unleashed her signature move, Sturm und Drang, cutting the monster down in one continuous combo. This attack was her last shot at turning the tide with one precise, decisive strike. The slash landed clean, tearing the monster's body apart in an instant. Believing she'd won after destroying all three heads, Lanceluna reported back to Eris with an incredibly proud look on her face. Unfortunately, Eris noticed something off about what was left of the monster and shouted a warning to her friend. Rather than dying, the monster shifted into recovery mode, transforming into something even more threatening than before. With no time to dodge, Lanceluna took a direct hit from an energy blast that sent her flying. Eris sprinted after her, realizing the situation had spiraled completely out of their control. As things grew more desperate, they finally remembered a key detail they'd overlooked about how to actually beat Cerberus. Turned out stabbing the heart wasn't enough. All three heads had to be destroyed at the same time or he'd just keep coming back. The monster gave them no breathing room, launching a lethal attack straight at Eris. Eris was knocked down, realizing it was impossible for her to take out all three heads at once by herself. Even battered and nearly out of hope, she forced herself back up to protect her friends. Right as she called out Ishudo's name, the figure she'd been searching for finally emerged through the settling dust. Ishudo arrived right on time to catch her, bringing Eris's desperate search to an emotional end. Ishudo finally found Eris in the middle of the chaos, right as things had started looking hopeless. Even though he'd shown up late, Ishudo's arrival instantly put an injured Eris at ease. Without wasting a second, Ishudo blocked the giant monster's attack while keeping Eris safe in his arms. The dungeon's layout had just completely reshuffled, and yet somehow Ishudo still managed to show up at exactly the right moment. Turned out it was Krull's help that let them track down Henrika Strandl and the rest of the team. Krull used his nose to follow Ludessa's scent, guiding the group straight through the maze. Murabuka Stelvio also showed up, introducing herself as part of Ishudo's support team. Murabuka explained that Ishudo's method of getting here had been pretty brutal, smashing through walls and floors however he pleased. That reckless, rule-breaking strategy had actually worked, and Henrika was more than grateful for the help. Even the guard dog monster in front of them started looking intimidated once it sensed the sheer level of Ishudo's strength. That was Cerberus, a far more dangerous foe than anything they'd faced before, and now the situation was spiraling even further out of control. Their escape plan fell apart when the exit route got sealed off by a swarm of destructive insects. While Cerberus kept the pressure on, Ishido tried to figure out just what kind of threat these strange bugs actually posed. Turned out the bugs were part of the dungeon's system, set to wipe out the entire area, and their time was nearly up. The only way to use the teleport gem and escape was to take down Cerberus as fast as possible. Ishido assured Eris he'd come fully prepared to get all of them out alive. As Ishido got ready to charge in alone, his friends warned him not to get careless against a monster this complex. The challenge was brutal. All three of Cerberus's heads had to be destroyed simultaneously, and only physical attacks could actually hurt him. Since magic and ranged weapons were useless here, Ishido realized he couldn't possibly pull this off alone. Ishido pinned his hopes on Murabu, the only one who held the key to winning this fight. Ishido suggested Murabu make a clone of herself, but she panicked instantly, insisting she was just a low-level soldier. The plan shifted to explosives, with Murabu asked to hurl her entire bomb stock straight into the monster's mouth. Even though Murabu was worried the mouth might snap shut on her mid-throw, Ishido worked to calm her down and keep her focused. Ishido gave her a boost of confidence by acknowledging her skill as an item soldier, sparking a surge of self-belief in her. Though she'd started off shaking, Ishido's words slowly turned Murabu's fear into real determination. Murabu finally caught fire with motivation, feeling ready to take on this heavy task and prove herself. Ishido could tell his little pep talk had worked, and now it was time to face down the waiting Cerberus. Tasks were divided efficiently. Murabu would handle prepping the bombs while Ishido drew the monster's attention. While telling the rest of the team to hold their position, Ishido asked Gelda to hang on just a little longer. The three-headed monster, nicknamed the Hellhound Guardian, finally moved in right toward Ishido. Without much preamble, Ishido launched an opening attack that landed a direct hit on one of the monster's heads. Ishido started taunting it, brushing off its power as not living up to its fearsome reputation. The monster's counterattack didn't faze Ishido at all. If anything, he pushed even harder, cornering the massive creature. In the middle of the fight, Ishido finally revealed his true identity as the demon lord, Ishvalt Aslay. With power surging off him, he made it clear his strength was way beyond any ruler of the underworld out there. Meanwhile, Murabu was busy fusing 3 bombs into a single, terrifyingly powerful combined explosive. Ishido's words had genuinely worked. Murabu now felt like nothing was impossible for her. While prepping the bomb, Murabu suddenly stopped to formally introduce herself once she noticed someone new nearby. She was floored to realize she was talking to none other than the famous adventurer Eris Frau. Even a little starstruck meeting her idol, Murabu still managed to finish her massive bomb right on time. Murabu started doubting whether she could keep pace with her teammates' attacks, but her friend reassured her all she needed to do was land the throw right. The plan was for Ishido and Eris to hit the heads together, timed to sync perfectly with the bomb's landing. Just as Murabu started feeling confident, Ishido suddenly appeared and asked if they were ready for the decisive strike. Turned out the guy had already torn into one of the monster's jaws, throwing off its regeneration and making the follow-up attack easier. Even though Murabu thought Ishido's methods were a little insane, she understood a damaged target would be way easier to hit. With prep done, they split up to disable each of the monster's heads at the same time. Working in perfect sync, Ishido and Eris moved into position to launch the opening strike. Murabu unleashed her ability, while Ishido gave the signal for Eris to take to the sky. Eris executed her wing technique to make sure their aerial strike landed exactly where it needed to. Their combined attack hit the monster dead-on, swallowed up in a storm of dust and fire. A massive explosion followed, instantly convincing Murabu the fight was finally over. She started celebrating, sure she'd landed her bomb throw straight into the monster's mouth with what she considered perfect timing. Unfortunately, Ishido and his teammate didn't share that confidence, still catching the unmistakable scent of failure in the air. Their instincts were right. The monster suddenly reared back up with a furious roar that left Murabu completely deflated. Ishido started asking for technical details about the trigger mechanism Murabu had used on her bomb. Turned out the device wasn't purely mechanical, since Murabu had built in a magical element as one of the trigger components. And that was exactly the problem. Ishido explained that the magic was what threw off the trigger's accuracy during a physical impact. Murabu broke down in tears, apologizing for her carelessness keeping the monster alive and putting all their lives at risk. Thankfully, Ishido stayed calm and instead blamed himself for not being careful enough when putting the plan together. Even so, they were still in serious trouble, since Gelda's magic had its limits and the monster still had all 3 heads intact. The legendary weapon, Dragon Lance Echalot, was lodged right there, and Ishido could tell it wasn't just any ordinary revolutionary spear. Their plan was to use this lance to trigger a massive explosion and finish off Cerberus, but there was one technical hitch. Turned out this lance was absurdly heavy, so heavy that even an elite knight couldn't lift it, only its original owner could. Ishido remembered Murabu once bragging that she could throw absolutely anything as long as it counted as an item. Time to put that claim to the test. Ishido challenged Murabu to try throwing that ridiculously heavy weapon. Murabu hesitated at first, but her pride as a skilled thrower got the better of her instantly. She steeled herself, deciding weight didn't matter as long as the system still classified the weapon as an item. Straining hard, she started pouring every ounce of her strength into backing up her own words. Miraculously, Murabu actually managed to lift the massive lance, leaving Ishido both stunned and impressed. With Cerberus still recovering, Ishido promised to treat everyone to a meal once this mission was done. Fired up and ready, the whole team immediately geared up to launch their second attack. Murabu hurled the legendary lance with a speed that was simply beyond reason. Ishido realized Murabu's ability wasn't just about throwing, she could also control the speed of whatever she threw. Every member of the team was in position, ready to make sure this attack would be the final one. Together, they shouted that this was the end of their long fight against the monster. The lance shot straight toward Cerberus, timed with the combined assault from Ishido and his friends. The attack landed with full force, exploding directly against the three-headed monster's body. As the dust started to clear, Cerberus was left utterly helpless against their overwhelming assault. Ishido just smirked and said his goodbyes, since today Cerberus was well and truly finished for good. Meanwhile, deep in the deadly dungeon of Gratios, a mysterious girl was already waiting on her throne, having won the race to the bottom. Darsha finally found her mother's keepsake and was dying to know what was inside. Turned out it was just an ordinary doll, one without a trace of magical aura at all. Even so, she was still happy, convinced this doll had been left behind specifically for her. Since it was her mother's creation, she decided to leave this place open, keeping it as a man-eating dungeon. Her business here was done. Now it was time to move on and dig into the truth about the tyrant demon lord through the prophecy book. Besides, she considered herself far too busy a woman to linger in one place for long. Somewhere in the city, a guy suddenly sneezed and felt like someone out there was talking about him. Sure enough, the whole town was buzzing, celebrating his role in saving the Silver Knight squad in the Witch's Labyrinth. Even with everyone calling him an incredible hero, Ishido genuinely hated being labeled that way. Unlucky for him, he was out in public, so like it or not, all the gossip about his heroics reached his ears anyway. Out of nowhere, a girl appeared carrying an envelope, claiming it was a reward meant for him. The reward turned out to be a gift from director Verdelaine, someone he'd honestly expected to dodge any real responsibility. Chatting casually, the girl mentioned that their injured friends were finally on the road to recovery. Expecting a meal voucher, the guy was shocked to find the envelope actually contained a one-day date voucher. Both of them got instantly flustered, realizing this whole date idea had been the director's one-sided scheme. Too embarrassed to stick around, the girl bolted the moment the letter officially changed hands. Even though he grumbled about the guild's stingy budget, Ishido didn't seem to mind all that much that his reward was a date with Eris.